The City and County of Swansea. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I'd like to call on Mr Parkhurst, please.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Apologies for absence from Councillors Mike Day, Victoria Holland, Alan Jeffrey, Di Jenkins and Paxton Hood-Williams.
The next item is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest, and if I can call on Deb Smith, please.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I've sent an email out today to all councillors looking at potential interests on today's agenda. There are a number, as you know, of detailed budget reports. On all of those, I've asked you to consider whether any decision affects any business or employment carried on by you, any body to which you have been elected or appointed by the authority. For example, there are Port Authority, Health Authority references and Fire Authority throughout the reports. If you're a member of a body referred to in the reports and you've been appointed by the council, then you need to declare a personal interest only. Similarly, if you're a school governor appointed by the LEA to one of the schools mentioned in the report, then you need to declare a personal interest only. And there's various references to schools and other bodies throughout the pack of reports. The two housing revenue account reports, there's the revenue budget at item 10 and the capital budget at item 12. If you hold a council tenancy, you should declare a personal interest only in relation to those items. And those are the ones that I've identified from the pack. But if you have any that you want to raise now, in addition to that, please do so. Right, do you want to start with, do you want to go through them in order? Would that be easier? Presiding Member? Yeah. Right, should we start then with the, I'll take the agenda item 8 and 9. It's the medium-term financial plan, the revenue budget. Has anybody got any interest to declare there? Take quite a while, this is, Jan, I think.
That's okay.
Right, can you fill out the report? Do you want to take them, Jan, in turn? Because we've got to declare them all, really.
Start with Councillor Matthews then in the back.
Personal interest in 8, 9 and 11, please.
Okay. Councillor Mike White.
Yeah, personal interest 8, 9 and 11, Chair. Thank you.
8, 9, 11, Port Health Authority and School Governor.
Thank you. Patience, sorry. Councillor Benton.
Personal interest 8, 9 and 11.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Personal interest 8, 9 and 11.
Okay. Councillor Pyloid.
During his underground testimony, 20 countries are in talks about joining a coalition of the willing to keep the peace in Ukraine. It was announced that if the UK government has signed a deal to provide.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on there. Okay, Councillor Jeff Jones. Sue Jones.
Personal interest 8, 9, 11.
Councillor. Right. Okay. Councillor Holly.
8, 9, 11 for me as well.
I'll come back to you, Linda. Sam.
Personal interest 8, 9, 11 and 16.
Thank you. Councillor Fiona Gordon. Oh, sorry. Councillor McKirrick.
Thanks. Personal interest 8, 9, 11.
Okay. Kedrick.
Yes, online.
Yeah. You. Yeah.
Personal interest in item 16 as an employee of the university.
Thank you. Councillor Walton.
Personal 11.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, personal 8 and 9.
Councillor Baker.
Yeah.
Item 12.
You. Councillor Hopkins.
Chair, I'd like to declare personal interest in 8 and 9, member of the Port Health Authority.
Councillor Lewis.
Item 11, personal only, school governor, school mentioned in the report.
Leader, did you put your hand up? No. No. Okay. Anybody over the side? Councillor Philpott.
Agenda item 9, personal only.
Councillor Lyndon Jones.
Personal interest 8, 9 and 11.
11. Yeah. Which one? Okay. Okay. Is that everybody on that one?
We've got some online.
Oh, some online, sorry. Oh, Councillor Keaton, is it? Councillor Keaton?
Hi, 11, I'm a governor at the Green School and Llanderw.
Okay. Councillor Chris Evans?
Personal interests 8, 9, 11, 16.
Griffiths, sorry, Councillor Griffiths.
Item 11, please, school governor.
Thank you. And Councillor Mary Jones.
Item 11, school governor.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Black.
Item 11, school governor.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Will Thomas
Item 11, school governor, thank you.
and Councillor Penny Matthews.
Sorry, item 11, school governor.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Kerry Evans.
Same, item 11.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Gibbard.
Yeah, same 11, school governor, Dunbar.
RFT. Thank you. Councillor Rita May.
11, school governor.
Okay. Okay.
Apologies, I could have taken a block declaration, I think, for
Would
school
we-
governor ones, yes, but we've got, yes, one. Graham Thomas.
Oh, Councillor Thomas, Graham Thomas, please.
Item 11, Chair, School Governor.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I think we've hit
Is
that
that
one.
everyone?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. No more declarations, that's it? Okay, thank you very much. We move on then to the minutes, and that's on pages 1 through to 10. I'll go through them page by page. The first is page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, all agreement? Thank you. The next item is written responses to questions asked at the last ordinary meeting of council, and those are on pages 11 and 12. And the next item is my announcements. Unfortunately, I'm starting with condolences. It's with sadness that I refer to the recent death of former councillor Paulette Smith, who served the community of Clydach for almost 14 years. So can I ask you to stand for a minute's silence as a mark of sympathy and respect, please? Okay, thank you. The next announcement is on a lighter note. I'm pleased to announce that 2 of our council apprentices have been shortlisted for this year's APSI Apprentice of the Year Awards, and they are Isaac Fab in the Year 4 category and Ashley Johnson, Year 2 category. The results should be announced by the end of the week. So I wish them both good luck. Okay, next item is the announcement of the leader. Over to you, leader.
Thank you, Presiding Member. First one is, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the decision yesterday at planning for the approval of the Skyline application. That will see now Skyline being able to move forward with installation of that facility on the hill, which will be able to attract 450,000 visitors to Swansea in its first year, rising to 750,000 visitors after 3 years. And I think it was an excellent debate yesterday at Planning Committee. What was clear is that for many, many months there had been circulation of inaccurate and incorrect information on social media by parties opposed to the application. And more worryingly, a number of the committee, including myself, expressed the concern at the abuse and intimidation of local members during the period. That is simply unacceptable. People are quite within their democratic rights to oppose a planning application or a policy or anything, but intimidating councillors and elected members simply is unacceptable, and I hope that won't be seen again when other planning applications and other measures come before this authority. But on a more positive note, presiding member, it was clear yesterday that this will significantly improve the ability for people with mobility issues and disabilities to get to the top of the hill. It'll improve the biodiversity and ecology of the hill. It will help with recreation and improvement to the cycle tracks. It will include upgrades to the bridleways and will prove, I think, to be a fantastic facility for Swansea. So I'm grateful to the members of the Planning Committee for their decision yesterday. Likewise, Chair, I'm pleased to say that we've been able to take a further step in our ambitions to secure a ferry service between South Wales and the southwest of England. I do have, if members wait with me just a second, the most recent update in terms of the votes cast in that consultation, which is currently live. I believe 2,674 votes have been cast so far, with 2,626 in favour of the ferry proposal. And again, it is a really interesting proposal because not only will it save people potentially 2.5 hours of a journey round to the southwest of England, but it could prove to be a significant boost to both sides of the channel. So again, very, very keen to see if we can move this one forward. It will no doubt require improvements to infrastructure on both sides, but that is something I think we can work with UK, Welsh Government and other local authorities to try and secure so that we're able to bring that infrastructure to South Wales and South West England. And my final one, Chair, was just to, again, recognise the fact that we have taken ownership now of 7172 Kingsway. We had a formal handover ceremony there recently, and we're able to announce two of the first tenants for the building. That is the national headquarters for TUI will move in there, and then there will be IWC in there as well, which is a local furniture provider, office supplies, etc. We are on track for a formal opening in May, and again, most of the rest of the space is, I think, under now formal offer. So we're relatively confident that we will be fully 100% let by the time we get to the formal opening, which I would like to place on record my thanks to all of the officers, to our contractors, Bouygues, and everybody that's been involved in the delivery of this fantastic building, which will be home to around 600 workers in the city centre and contribute around £38 million a year to our local economy. Thank you, Presiding Member. Apologies, Presiding Member, there was the fourth one, which is tomorrow. Very pleased that we will be gathering in the park, Amy Dilwyn Park, tomorrow by the arena to unveil the first purple plaque in the city to Amy Dilwyn, who was a formidable industrialist. Her impacts on Swansea are well known, and again I look forward to joining colleagues tomorrow, including Councillor Gibbard, to unveil our first purple plaque. Thank you, Chair.
Okay,
Yeah,
the next
I think if I could ask the leader if he would support the fact that we ask the leader of the Conservative Party to distance himself away from the leader of the Labour Conservative Party in Parliament when she was asked about the comments by the Vice President of America, which cast doubt on the ability of our armed forces. I think it was one of the most disgraceful things that any ally has ever said. And considering the work that our colleague, Councillor Wendy Lewis, does with the armed services, I do think the leader, I think we should all ask the leader of the Conservatives to distance himself away from those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawley.
Absolutely. I think most of the stuff that's gone on in the Oval Office over the last month has been disgraceful, and this was just another episode. So, you look, I'm on record many times. People know my views of President Trump and of Elon Musk, the dual president in the United States at the moment. And I think JD Vance's comments are deplorable and should rightly be criticised.
Okay, thank you. The next item is public questions. I believe we've got 3 speakers. The first speaker is Mark Evans. Can I remind you, we've got 10 minutes of public questions and you've got 3 minutes to make your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, Mark Evans, President of Swansea Trades Council and a Socialist Party member. My question is, the Council are right to point out that there's been an increase in funding from the Starmer-led Labour government of 4.7%. Any increase, of course, is welcome, but the Council seems more reticent to explain that this increase does not keep services functioning at their current heavily depleted levels and certainly does not begin to replace the Council funding lost since 2010. Increase in funding does not begin to meet the increased demand for services. We wonder if the Council has seriously considered the impact of making further devastating cuts will have on your workforce. Not replacing staff and not filling vacancies puts a great burden on the staff that remain, resulting in many suffering with chronic stress and increased mental health problems by having to do the work of those that have left. Isn't it about time the Council put its employees and the public first by refusing to impose further cuts and by implementing a legal, needs-led, no-cuts budget?
Peter.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I thank the gentleman for his question. It's a very similar question to the one he asked me at Cabinet, and my response will be very similar also. So I think the premise, I do agree with part of it in that we have seen a long period of austerity imposed upon the UK public sector since 2010 when the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition came into office. That has placed huge pressure on public services across the UK. Austerity never worked. It was proved to be a failure. It was a policy that should never have been imposed upon public services in the UK. For our part in Swansea, we have always taken the approach of trying to defend jobs, trying to make sure that we mitigated as best we could the effects of that policy from that coalition and then subsequently the Tory government in London. And just to put some numbers around that, our budget has increased since 2015-16 from 400 million to nearly 643 million. So again, whilst there have been savings, the overall budget has increased. Our staff levels are pretty much what they were in 2012. And again, our absentee and sickness levels are pretty much what they were as of 2010. And in terms of how the churn has gone on, because of course, we've been busy modernising services, making sure that where we deliver social care, we deliver it in a different way to make sure that people are cared for whenever possible in their own home, able to live independently for long as they possibly can. And again, looking at the figures here, for instance, child and family full-time equivalent levels have increased from 416 to 616. Waste parks and cleansing has increased from 398 to 453. And as I said, there have been similar changes in other areas of the council. And again, what we've tried to do is mitigate as best as possible. This year, there is a net investment of £52 million, a total ask of about £70 million. There are some savings or fee increases in there, which account for part of that £18 million that is referred to as savings in the book. But actually, if you look at the total budget, it's a net increase of 52 million. And that means that, as you'll see, I mean, you are very welcome to stay for the next bit where we go through those figures. It is record amounts going into education, social care, place-based services, services across the council, getting more money than they've ever had before. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. The next is from Mr. Gareth Bromhall.
Thank you. Gareth Bromhall. I'm Secretary of Swansea Trades Council and also a member of the Socialist Party. As an NHS worker and a union rep in the ambulance service, I see on a daily basis the effect of austerity on our health and social care services. Having also spent many years working in social care, I know the intrinsic link that local authority funded care and the NHS services are to each other, and how much changes in one has an effect on the other. Amongst the multitude of factors causing the current crisis within the NHS is the reality of bed blocking, where people who are able to be discharged from hospital are prevented to do so due to a lack of social care provision, which causes a domino effect into the wards, emergency departments, and ambulance bays and back into the community. That being said, and while acknowledging the proposed increase outlined in the budget document this year, I'd like to ask the following. How much in real terms has been lost from the adult social care budget in the last 10 years? How much more in terms of funding is needed to meet the current and near future demand for adult social care? And what are the council doing, working alongside the NHS and other stakeholders to improve the situation around care packages and social care provision?
Thank you, Mr. Bromham, for that question. And again, can I begin by thanking all of those that work in our NHS and our care services for the work they do every day. It's an incredibly difficult job and they should be rightly commended for what they do. In terms of your specific question, first of all, can I just again repeat what I've said in many other places? I think, there is a challenge in that we have a largely privatised care system in the UK and we have a public NHS. And I would like to see a publicly funded, publicly delivered care service to sit alongside our NHS. And I think that would help with easing all of the problems that we've got in the current system, whereby private companies basically provide bids into packages of care and contribute sometimes to that bed blocking. But I know Councillor Gibbard, our teams, Mr Howes, are working very hard to make sure that we play our part as a council so that we get people out of hospital as quickly as possible, get them the care package they need and get them to where they need to be so they're not in hospital when they don't need treatment. In terms of your question, it's a difficult one, bearing all factors and the period of time, but generally, looking back over the period, the easy bit is over the last 10 years, the budget has gone from 66.4 million to 127.9 million. So that is a compound increase of around 7.5% a year. At the same time, pressures have grown by about 2% a year on average, and inflation's been around 3% a year on average. If you add pressures and inflation together and compare it to the increases in the budget, the increases have outstripped the pressures, even with austerity. And that is because we have done what we can to work out money within our own budget to continue to support social care. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you both. The next question comes from, excuse me, Mr. Dave Warren, please.
Right, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm also a member of the Socialist Party, but speaking here on behalf of Swansea Trades Council. I've submitted a fairly lengthy written question, so I'll try to paraphrase that for you now. As has been said previously, I obviously welcome the extra funding this year. But despite now having Labour Council here in Swansea, Labour in power in the Senedd, and Labour in power in Westminster, and despite the extra money, the Cabinet is still proposing to make £18 million of further cuts or savings, as you refer to them. And that, along with above inflation council tax rise, is obviously going to impact negatively on the residents of Swansea and the council workforce. And the council's budget report highlights those facts. Because it says that we can expect significantly reduced resources in the medium term, and the outlook remains very challenging beyond 2025-2026. So I want some specific information. What is the total amount of savings that this council has made since the start of your Sustainable Swansea strategy in 2013 to date, in other words, up to the end of the 2024-25 financial year? And I think, more importantly, what steps has this council taken or is planning to take to challenge the Labour governments in Cardiff Bay and Westminster to provide that lost funding that's been lost over the past 15 years and to secure adequate funding for this year's budget and for future budgets in order to meet the needs of the people of Swansea and the council workforce. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Warren. And again, very similar question to the one you asked at Cabinet. So thank you for pre-sight of it. Again, on the last point, as you'll know, we take part in the Welsh Local Government Association. And as a council, I'm deputy leader of Welsh Local Government. We lobby both Welsh and UK government very, very regularly to ensure that local government's voice is strong within all of the challenges and all of the decisions needed to be made by both the Welsh and UK government. The first thing is to make sure that we have a UK government that provides the appropriate amount of money to Wales. And as you alluded to, over the last 13 years, the Tories in London, with their allies in the Liberal Democrats, did everything they could to prevent fair share of that money coming over the bridge into Wales, using Treasury trickery to make sure they disenfranchise Wales. HS2 is a really good example, but there are many, many others in terms of how Wales did not get its fair share of the UK money. Once that money does come to Wales, as it did this year, and of course, we had a really good settlement, much better than was proposed by the outgoing Tory government, an extra £1.7 billion for Wales. And with that, we got around 250 million extra for local government. That is really helpful. On top of that, there are a number of one-off grants, and in the final budget, there was a further 82 million or so for local government as part of the Welsh Government's final budget. So we lobby hard, we have difficult conversations with both governments, and we will continue to do that. Again, I can only point to the facts and to the figures, which is, despite the amount of savings we've had to make, and I think from my recollection, the Swansea commissioning programme turned out about 70 million of savings overall, but that's in amongst a budget that has gone up by nearly double over the period. So again, whilst there have been savings, the budget has continued to grow, the investment in services continue to grow, where we got to the point this year that is a record £584 million for services this year, the equivalent of £5,400 per household going in. So my final point would be, when you look at the budget book, there are a couple of different parts to it. It can be overwhelming for people who've even been through the budget many, many years. And I do pay tribute to the Trades Council. They turn up every year, they read the budget, and they do bring questions every year, which not many people do. But you have to look at the budget book in different ways. So first of all, the medium-term financial plan is really a bit of crystal ball gazing into the future. It isn't set in stone. It's our best guess of what the future may look like, based on what the governments in London and Cardiff are able to tell us at this point in time. And I think that's really important, because we're about to go into a comprehensive spending review. So there isn't much certainty about what the future looks like, and we'll hopefully get that in the next few months. I think the second point then is, when you look at the savings proposals, if you look at each one of those, many of them will be fee increases to services in line with inflation or just above. And they are not ones which will see cuts to jobs. If you look through the book, there's about 11 posts at risk within the budget book. Of those, many of them are already vacant. And again, as I said, I think in our conversations when you invited me to the Trades Council, what we try and do is to make sure we redeploy staff into other roles rather than lose a job. And we've been hugely successful working with our union colleagues to do that over many years. But again, we will continue to lobby, as you would expect us to do, for the best deal, not just for local government, but for Swansea.
No, Robbie, you didn't answer the one part of the question. Can you put a figure on the total amount of savings made since 2013? I think 70 million was the figure given in the report up until 2020.
Warren, I will get you that figure in writing. I don't have all of the detail available to me tonight to add to that, but that is something we're looking at. One of the challenges for us is it predates some of the information that we hold. So again, I don't want to give you misleading information. I've quoted a figure that I'm relatively confident in for a period, but there are stuff at the margins which will need to be added in. So we will get you a written answer on that one.
Thank you. That's the end of the public question. We now move on to the item 8, which is the medium-term financial plan. And I'd like to call on Mr. Ben Smith, please.
Thank you, presiding member. I intend to give some general overarching comments on all the reports, but with permission reserve my right to come in on each of the individual items. I think that'll be the most efficient way to use my technical advice on the individual reports in due course. I can then be short on some and longer on some of the others. As ever, uncertainty pervades. One key message I need to draw your attention to amongst all the reports is I have put an emphasis in the revenue report on 2 Section 25 matters. I will discuss them more fully when we come to the report. That should give you a clear indication that you are at the limits of what you can do given the overall settlement, notwithstanding the public questions and answers given, a council tax proposal which is lower than many, a record amount of money going into services, etc. But I'll talk a little bit more about the ramifications of that when we come to it. I must only emphasise you are legally obliged to weigh my technical Section 151 officer advice in relation to those 2 Section 25 matters. But as I say, I'll discuss them in appropriate time. I say we're in the uncertain times. I always say that, don't I? And to some extent, the leader's already touched upon that. We await the Chancellor of the Exchequer's 26th of March. Is it a spring statement, forecast or budget? Depends on your views of the world. And as you've referenced, Leader, the spending review to come at the end of June, which does mean that some of my proverbial crystal ball gazing on each of the items is as uncertain as ever. The outlook for local government and teacher pay is uncertain. The local government pensions landscape, inflation has started to tick up. Will it come back down? The national insurance debate around compensation, which I'm sure will come up in the revenue budget. Will there or will there not be much growth over both the coming year and the medium-term financial plan? And what might we get in future settlements post that spending review when government will set out its priorities? Because it's another 1 year, relatively late in the day settlement. Stuff only cleared the Senate this week, with the added uncertainty from the UK government, and as has already been touched upon by others, but I'll say it more appropriately as an officer, a fair amount of increased geopolitical world uncertainty. My thanks as ever to all staff and colleagues who've worked with me through the process, and I am likely to make some more specific comments on thanks to individual staff as we go through the individual reports. But I have nothing further to say on the overarching set of reports, but we'll come back in due course on each of the items with your permission, presiding member, in due course. I'm happy to take technical questions on the overall, but I equally accept members may want to ask those technical questions when it comes to the individual reports. Thank you.
I should have read this out at the beginning, sorry. It's Section 151, Mr. Ben Smith is to give the overall technical presentation on all the budget reports. Councillors will then be invited to ask broad technical questions of the 151 officer. Then the leader of the council to give a broad budget presentation. This will cover several agenda items, and I'll extend that time as allowed under the Constitution. Following the presentation, I will allow questions to be put to the leader, and each report will then be dealt with individually. The 151 officer will speak specifically on each report, and councillors will have an opportunity to ask questions relating to the reports. So if you've got any technical questions for Mr. Smith, now's the time, please. No? Oh, sorry.
Hi, is this on the MFTP? Asking questions on the MFTP, just, or have I got it wrong?
This is just a broad, this is an opportunity to answer.
Technical questions.
Technical question on the MFTP?
There'll be an individual consideration of each report in turn.
Right,
so if
so
it's
this
about
is
that
overarching,
report,
is it?
yes, this
Right,
is just
I'll-
about
I'll-
Mr. Smith's broad.
Right, okie doke.
You'll wait for that, okay? Anybody else? Nobody online? Okay. Oh, sorry, leader.
Okay, Chair, just a second. Hopefully it'll share. It does look like it's doing that, which is good. There we go. Can I just check that members online can see the presentation? Okay. Yeah, that's again thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to canter through at quite a pace, you'll be pleased to know. So let's start with where we are. So first of all, I want to place on record my thanks to all of our staff for another fantastic year of delivery. That is an example of the budget leaflet that is going out with all of the council tax bills. It lays out the things we've done on bus stops, on social care, on helping people get meals, on supporting people in schools and in our communities. And again, it gives a good flavour of the hard work that has been done by our staff. So again, I wanted to place on record my thanks to our staff for what they've done in the last year. Moving on to the revenue budget, as I said, in terms of the headlines, it is a record budget in all matters. So a record £584 million going into services. That's an increase of £52 million in a single year, and a record £5,400 equivalent per household being invested as part of the proposed budget today. To break that down, we have, again, a record sum going into education, £229 million. That's an increase over last year's base of 23.3 million. But of course, members will remember we put an extra £11 million in last year from energy support and from the IT reserve into schools, which they will retain in their base now. And then there'll be more money going in on top of that. So again, Councillor Smith and myself met with the head teachers and we've talked them through the budget. And again, it is a good settlement that sees an increase of about 12% in the school's budget. In terms of social care, they see an increase of nearly 15% this year, 5 times the current rate of inflation, an extra £25.4 million, taking it to a record £196 million. That money is absolutely needed because we've seen a tick up of pressures to social care of nearly 20% at our front door. So our teams are working extremely hard, delivering more care than ever before, but more money is needed to support the teams in the work that they are doing. We've run poverty campaigns, our anti-poverty campaigns. Councillor Pugh and Councillor Gwilliam have been delivering schemes in both the summer and the winter. We are able now through this budget to baseline £350,000 into the budget each year to help with those campaigns. And it is our intention come the outturn report to add to that should we recognise a surplus this year. So again, that is a starting position. It will allow us to run our summer and winter campaigns again this year, which allowed families to get food help, to get vouchers, to get support. And again, that was a very, very successful campaign. And I'm grateful for the work done by Cabinet members and all of our teams in poverty to make that happen. Likewise, we've continued to run free bus offers this year again, and our intention is to continue with that until the bus bill comes in. So this will take free bus travel occurring this year and next up until the election when the bus bill is due to come into play. And of course, the Welsh Government also announced in its final budget the introduction from September of lower price tickets for people under the age of 21, £1 single tickets and £3 ride all day tickets. And again, if we are able to improve upon the Welsh Government offer, we will do so. We also introduced a fund to support veterans in recent years. And again, I'm very pleased that that is now in base. So it will be a repeating fund giving veterans the opportunity to apply for extra support. I was with Councillor Elliot King last night, who is Cabinet Member with responsibility for veterans, and Councillor Wendy Lewis, who is the Armed Forces Champion, talking to veterans groups about the support we can give them this year, highlighting the availability of the fund. We will also be providing support to allow street parties to take place this year for Victory in Europe Day. It's the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe, and also similarly for VJ Day and for remembrance events. There are about 30-odd remembrance events that take place across our city. Some of those require road closures, and again, we intend to fully cover the costs of those road closures so they don't fall to veterans associations for it. And we do hope that as many people as possible engage in the VJ Day celebrations this year. And then finally, just to say, we've also established a men's shed fund. And again, we've got more men's sheds than any other location in Wales. They're doing great work to help people who are struggling to meet colleagues and to improve their mental well-being. That fund is also being baselined, so it will be a repeating fund. And again, Councillor Pugh has been, sorry, Councillor Anthony, apologies, has been again administering or helping to administer that fund with Spencer Martin. In terms of place-based services, again, a record amount of 96 million. Some of that is capital, so I'll come to the detail on place in a moment. But again, like the other departments, seeing a record sum available for investment. Specifically, in terms of £20 million, this is the highest amount that we've been able to do in a single year, partially possible because of the LGBI Local Government Borrowing Initiative from Welsh Government. But the programme will allow us to do major resurfacing works, patch service works, pothole repairs, path upgrades in parks, new lightings in parks, drainage works, railings replacement, unadopted roads upgrades. Yes, we will be tackling unadopted roads as part of this scheme as well. Telematics upgrades, bridge repairs, retaining wall repairs, new EV charging, high-speed EV charging, a residential charging pilot, which will potentially allow our tenants and our residents who don't have driveways to be able to charge their car on the highway. So we'll begin a pilot on that. And the AIR's motorhome pitches, again, establishing for the first time formal motorhome pitches for people who want to visit our beautiful city, but do so in a motorhome. So again, a lot in there. And again, Councillor Stevens has been working with his team to pull together that enhanced programme of repairs for the coming year. In addition, in terms of waste and cleansing, again, we've had some difficulties in terms of adoptions of new working practices in waste. And again, I commend the work that Councillor Anderson has been doing to overcome that, working with Councillor Hopkins and our trade union colleagues and the staff to look at how we can improve the way in which we operate waste services. They now have a brand new fleet of vehicles that we promised to invest in last year. They are now operational. But we are committing to employ additional crews and to use those vehicles at different times of the day, so that if there are technical or staffing issues that affect the routes that we run in primarily the morning period, there will be more crews coming on in the afternoon to be able to do the sweep. And again, the aim is to make sure that we can say to our residents, we will collect your rubbish and your recycling on the day that we tell you that we'll be coming. So again, giving them the confidence that they desire. We'll also be establishing a new depot up at Llansamlet, and that'll allow us to move and centralise a number of our waste and cleansing services in a brand new depot, giving our staff much better facilities than they currently have at Pipehouse Wharf. In terms of homes and housing, again, a significant sum being invested this year of £56 million. There are some slight reductions in what we would have liked to put in that service because of some of the risks that Mr. Smith has given us advice on. We've heeded that advice. We don't think it's sensible to go against the Section 151 officer's advice on this matter. And over the next few years to 28-29, we propose to invest some £219 million upgrading homes for our tenants. And just to say, if the risks that Mr. Smith has advised us on subside, then it's our intention to move money back into the homes and housing budget so that we can do all of the programme that we would originally like to have done. Moving on to capital budget. So again, just a bit more detail about where the money's coming from for the 20 million. So we'd already committed 1 million from the previous capital equalisation reserve take. That'll be invested this year. There's a 3 million draw from the insurance reserve both this year and next year. And then as part of the local government borrowing initiative, which is split 60-40 over a 2-year period, we will be investing a further £4.25 million. And when you add then to the active travel grants, you add to the other transport grants and the core grant and the core funding that we have, that gets you up to your £20 million of investment. And again, as I say, a record sum. We made a commitment last year to invest in more modern changing rooms. Our changing rooms were primarily built in the 60s, 70s and 80s. They were primarily at the time used by men only. And again, we've seen a huge upsurge in girls and women taking up sports, football and other sports. It is important that our changing rooms are there for the use by everyone, and therefore Councillor Francis Davis is working on a scheme, working closely with the Football Association of Wales, where we believe this core investment from us can potentially be doubled, bringing improved facilities to a number of locations across the city and county. And again, £1 million allocated last year. And again, I'll give notice, Chair, so that everybody's clear. Mr. Smith asked us at Cabinet what we would like to do with the £1 million that is unallocated currently in capital, and therefore I'm proposing that we allocate that spare £1 million into this scheme, and that is made available for the year 26-27. In terms of further sports and play investment, we made a commitment to improve our network of skate parks. And then Councillor Francis Davis, as he always does, went even further. And now we have a scheme which a number of members are also contributing to. Thank you very much, members, from your community budget. We're able to now announce a £2.6 million network of skate and bike parks across the city and county of Swansea. This will make us the skate and bike capital of Wales, if not the UK. And again, that delivery will begin later this year. In terms of community priorities, members have been making use of the Community Investment Fund. That fund has seen nearly £1.5 million invested in community priorities identified by local members in talking to their communities. Again, the remaining balance of that fund will roll forward into this year and will be topped up with a further £1 million, allowing local ward members to come forward with further schemes, matching it to either their community budgets or other external sources of funding to be able to do larger projects in their wards. Just a quick one on major capital projects. I know the Lord Mayor was with me today over in the... Turn that down. Sorry. So firstly, Castle Square Gardens. This will begin building in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So you will see the scheme there, which gives you an uplift of about nearly doubling the amount of green space in the old Castle Square. New play fountains for children, a new jumbotron, new usable public areas, and also 2 new units, which potentially could be restaurants, or, as I said today, we do seem to have riches in terms of local ice cream producers, and I think it'd be great to see one of those take a unit in our centre. In terms of 71-72 Kingsway, as I said, that build is now complete. We've taken ownership from Bouygues. We've announced the first 2 tenants, and again, by May, we will be ready to do the formal opening, and we aim to have the building 100% let at that stage. When it's 100% let, there'll be about 600 people based there, and as I said, circa £38 million worth of impact on our local economy from that building alone. So again, in terms of trying to get our city centre working again, it's really important that we have people working in our city centre. We've been consulting on the entrances to Swansea Market. I believe the ones that are on the screen there are the public's chosen outcome, but we'll see when the report formally comes back. But again, members will know we invested around £3 million in a brand new roof for the market. The market is 100% let. Councillor Hopkins is talking to market traders, and we're looking at how we can continue to support them in terms of the pressures they face. It is the UK's best market, that is without doubt. It's won the award many times. It's a real jewel in the crown of our city centre. And again, making the entrances welcoming so that people notice there's a market there for their tourists and they're attracted in. So those works will take place later this year as well. When British Home Stores closed nationally, we took the opportunity with the Welsh Government to purchase the building so that we can move our central library and our archives, which remain at risk in the Civic Centre because of the climate change issues, to move the archives into a purpose-built state-of-the-art facility in that building, to move the central library into this building, to move the new children's library into this building, and then a range of other services right in the heart of the city centre. This was pivotal, sorry, I can never get that word, pivotal in ensuring that Marks and Spencer stayed in our city. It is quite clear from the discussions that myself and the Chief Executive had with Marks and Spencer seniors that they would have been considering leaving were not the things around them going on, but specifically the stuff that was happening on their doorstep. So again, this is why it's important that we continue as a council and as an authority to invest in our city centre and move more functions there, more people living, working, enjoying and learning in our city centre. And that should open in October this year. My thanks to Councillor King for the work that he's been doing with his officers and Jeff Bacon and his team in terms of getting that building ready. We've also secured planning approval for the new public sector hub. This will be across from St Mary's Church, just behind where the remaining bits of the St David's Centre are. Again, this will see the residual staff move out of the Civic Centre so that can be fully turned over to Urban Splash. We're home to a number of UK government departments, which we will seek to move into this building as well. And we're in discussions with Welsh Government about them coming into this building. So it'll be a truly public sector hub with local, national governments sharing that building. The ground floors will be retail. And again, we would hope to be on site building this building by the end of the year. We've also, as you know, been in discussions with the Ospreys for a return to St Helens. Just to be clear in terms of what I can say about the deal, because it remains commercially confidential, some of the details, we are not giving the Ospreys a loan. We are not giving the Ospreys the ground. We are not selling them the ground. We retain ownership and control of St Helens, but we are supporting investment into that facility. It will see a new stadium created with a capacity of 6,000 to 8,000. It does unfortunately mean that cricket has to relocate to the Civil Service Cricket Ground, and we are supporting cricket's move in that. We asked the governing bodies of the sports about what their intentions were, and it was clear that the cricket governing bodies did not have a future at St Helens in terms of being able to commit to Premier Sport being played there. So cricket will move to the Civil Service Ground, and this facility will be created, and the aim of the Ospreys is to get this operational by the start of the 25-26 season. Actually, it will now have 4 stands, not 3, but as somebody who used to go down and watch the Whites when I was much younger, it'll be great to see the stands over the terracing as well, because you did get very wet, and of course the pitch will now be a lot closer to the stands as well, and I do wish the Ospreys the very best when they return there. As you would expect us to have done, we have redlined the fact that community use has to continue at that facility, and we do hope to see the Whites and other teams and community use of those facilities when that new stadium is operational. Just a quick one then on Skyline Park. We announced this yesterday, this little preview video following the decision by planning to approve it. So just so that people are aware of what is proposed here, it may be a bit juddery for those online because of the size of this file, but essentially it's a base station located close to the Penderyn Whisky and current Park and Ride. It will then allow you to get on a cable car and take a journey up to the top of Kilvey Hill. And again, for most people with physical disabilities at the moment, you cannot get to the top of the hill. It is not an easy place to reach. At the top of the hill, there'll be a number of luge tracks, a summit station where you'll be able to disembark, cafes, restaurants, and a viewing platform. This is a video of some of the luge tracks in one of Skyline's other facilities, but very similar layout will be proposed here. And again, it won't just give great entertainment during the day, but also during the night, as you'll see here, where people can experience non-powered kart racing down the luges in the night. There'll also be a zip line to take thrill seekers through the trees, and also a sky swing for those who really want an adrenaline-fueled experience. As I said today at the conference, we're lucky because, no disrespect to our neighbours over in East Talbot, but if you're on Kilvey Hill, you're looking at Mumbles, and it's a much nicer view than looking at the steelworks. But again, I think this will become a fantastic venue for people to enjoy on a summer evening up on the hill. So again, hopefully that will be an excellent addition to our economy. 450,000 tourists projected in its first year, 750,000 tourists after 3 years, 300 jobs during construction, 110 jobs total once the facility is operational, and a big boost to our local businesses, because when people come here, you'll know that the arena is outperforming its business case. When you add those two together, you're looking at circa 1 million visitors a year coming to Swansea, who'll be staying in hotels, taking taxis, shopping in shops, eating in restaurants, supporting our local businesses. And it's part of that broader river corridor plan. And again, grateful to the planning committee last month for approving some of the upgrades to the Musgrave engine building house and the Vivian house. And again, as part of the successful levelling up bid that we secured, this will see walkways, a new walkway along the river corridor, new buildings there to support and supplement what Skyline will bring and what Penderyn already offers. Okay, there we go. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we are proposing, in delivering all of that, a council tax rise, headline rise of 5.95%, one of the lowest rises in Wales. But of course, that incorporates the fire levy. And you know that we continue to lobby Welsh Government to turn that levy into a precept, so it doesn't get paid out of the council's budget, but gets paid separately from money raised through a precept. That works out for a Band B property, and we've got more A and B than any other types of properties, of around £1.46 more a week for that. It still means that we're over £200 a year cheaper than our neighbours in Neath Talbot. And of course, if you look west Carmarthenshire, their increase is around 9.7, but I think they may have ticked down a couple of points of a percent on that, given that they've set their final budget recently, and Neath Talbot around 7%. So again, our neighbours charging more than us for similar services. So just before I forget, it wouldn't be one of my presentations if I didn't have a little bit of a diversion, but what if things were different? Well, again, there's been a number of rumours doing the rounds recently. I don't know whether you've spotted them on social media. I'm not talking about the rumour that Councillor Jeff Jones has been cast as Happy in the London Palladium presentation of Snow White. I'm talking about the fact that Ncuti Gatwa is apparently stepping down as Doctor Who. And if you've been watching social media, there is a potential of who the next Doctor Who could be. And I think it might be somebody from Swansea, because he's been sporting a Doctor Who scarf in lots of photos recently. So I'm sure he'll have a better press pick if he does become the travelling Time Lord. But I know, but don't tell anybody. Let's take a little journey into history on Pete's TARDIS, shall we? So what if we went back to 2012? What was happening in 2012? Well, Boris was Mayor of London, and the Condems were rolling out austerity in a way not seen for nearly a century. And strange enough, these two were Lib Dem cabinet members running Swansea, stuff that they seem to want to forget these days. And what did they do? Well, let's have a little look. They came along in 2012 looking at what they were facing in the election with a council tax gimmick. So they decided to set council tax at 0%. That was despite inflation being at 3.4% that year. So that in that year, it cost at least £5 million to keep council tax at 0%. But of course, council tax is a repeating loss. If you don't raise the money, you lose it every year since. So Councillor Rice, who was the cabinet member for finance at the time, had lost us £26 million out of services by 2017. He'd lost us £55 million out of services by 2022, and he'd lost us £73 million out of services by 2025. Now, again, when we talk about budget cuts, decisions matter. Decisions matter. And again, you know, a pre-election gimmick of 0% when you've got inflation at 3.4, you've got pressures would have been on top of that. It didn't obviously save the Liberal Democrats or the Independents from being put into opposition, but it did and continues to cost this authority every year. Every year it costs us money. So how about borrowing? Because again, we talked about this last year. We know, and to be fair to Councillor Rice, he wasn't a cabinet member when this happened, and as Councillor Holly did say, they didn't take the decision. This was taken by Treasury people or the 151 office at the time. But during the period when they were in office, risky lender option, borrower option loans were taken out. We have paid off £20 million worth of risky Lib Dem Lobo loans. And on top of that, and on top of that, this administration has set aside around £14 million every year, amounting to some £182 million. Now, the way local government finance works is you do not pay off your debt until it matures or you get hefty penalties. But again, in terms of historic borrowing, £182 million has been paid off by this Labour administration since 2012, plus obviously the risky Lobos. So again, you know, whilst they may place Upland's lapel badges on them these days, but they were the Liberal Democrats at the time, and they did take some of those decisions. So, just in terms of the next doctor, we do think, and I'm waiting for the wonderful amendments that are due coming soon. I mean, I think it's perfect. Many of us think that some of the Uplands party members do live in a different reality, so the role might be very appropriate for Councillor May to go off into a different galaxy. We wish him well with his new role. But let's presuppose that Councillor May takes us forward for a year and looked at if we'd have ended up in a scenario where the Tories were re-elected in London. Well, again, I've checked with Mr. Smith, and the Tories were proposing to provide Welsh Government and the local government in Wales with significantly less than we got. In fact, around £20 million less we would have had the Tory plans for Wales been implemented this year. So, what does that mean? Well, if you'd have had to make £20 million worth of cuts this year out of that budget, we'd have had to consider monthly bin collections, closure of libraries, closure of leisure centres, closure of community centres, over 400 staff losing their jobs, no road repair programme because there was no capital budget proposed, no help for families or veterans, an end to free bus travel that would have had to have ended, and we would have had to remove all of the community priority budgets that we're able to support members to deliver their communities. So when people ask, what difference does the UK Labour government make? That's the difference, because that is what we would have seen as a settlement for Swansea this year. So again, just to close, Chair, we are grateful for a really good settlement from UK Labour government. We're grateful for a fair settlement from our colleagues in Welsh Government, and that has allowed us to set a fair council tax for the people of Swansea with £1.46 a week average rise, meaning that we can invest £5,400 in each household in Swansea. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any questions for the leader? Sorry?
We'll stand up.
Okay, so you can sit.
Okay, I have to say that after that, what can you say? We're living in utopia, in a land of milk and honey. But the problem is that the leader is very specific and does give it a tilt, which makes you think that everything is wonderful. I am putting forward an amendment, not yet, but I will put it forward later. The one thing that obviously the leader doesn't say is that when any organisation, any group takes over the council, it keeps on paying off debt. And in the 8 years that we were lucky enough to run this council well, we paid off debt. You're right, David, it is right. We paid off debt, probably as much, if not more, than the current. I haven't got the figures, because if I'd realised we were going to have a history lesson, I would have, you know, got some more facts. But the fact is, from 2016, you, the Labour Party, have added to removing money from the revenue account. Well over £30 million. And that was till last year. It hasn't happened this year because you've actually taken money out. And that meant that all these savings and cuts and what have you have been worse by that 30 million. But the fact remains that when the leader has been lucky on occasion because the Section 151 officer has been able to get very good loans at very low interest rates. Excellent, well done. But then don't condemn his past colleagues, the Section 151 officer, condemning his colleagues for then going out and getting loans at that time with the best that they could get. Because that's what you were doing, leader. You're not condemning or taking the mickey out of political parties. You're condemning the professional people that were there at the time. You can nod and laugh, but it's true. And that really does bring you down. I have to say, you know, your presentations are very good, very professional, but when you start condemning people who are not here now for what their professional opinion was at that time, that actually does degrade your presentation. You know, let's be blunt about it. They're not here to defend themselves. I could go on a lot further, but there's no point in it because, you know, apart from the trip through the TARDIS, which is, you know, let's be blunt about it, it's supposition. But apart from that, there is very little newer things in there because it's what we've done last year. And I should imagine you may even say it again next year because of certain issues. But just to say, we will be putting forward an amendment. Obviously not at the moment, because I'm sure other people have got comments to make about the presentation. Thank you.
Councillor Will Thomas.
Thanks, presiding member, and lots of nice shiny things, as Chris just alluded to there. So I'm sure we can all look forward to those. One thing the leader's forgetting, obviously, is he might say that the council's losing money when you reduce the burden on the taxpayer for council tax. But what we've got to remember is that money stays in the pockets of local people. So, you know, it might be less money for the council, but it's more money for local people, helping stimulate the economy. So, you know, I know it's political ideology, but people spend their money far better than governments and councils, in my opinion. Secondly, I just wanted to ask a question on 7172 the Kingsway, which looks fantastic, and that's right in the middle of city centre, which is obviously a benefit. However, am I correct in thinking that the tenants that have occupied that, have they come out of an existing office space in the city? And if so, is that doesn't seem to be beneficial, but maybe I'm wrong there. Thank you.
Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thomas. I think, look, it's always about balance when you're having to make a decision on the rate of council tax, and we always try and strike the fair balance. The point I'm making in the presentation is that the 0% looked out of kilter with all of the other decisions that the previous administration took. It was significantly different to the council tax rises that they'd made in previous years, which I think, looking back at my previous presentation, I think they were average about 3.4%, maybe a little higher. So 0% looked gimmicky, and that's what I'm calling them out on. So, and I think that's fair game politically. On your point about individuals spending money more wisely than council or councillors, then more than happy to consider retracting your community budget if you'd like to give it up, and we can have a debate if the public want to spend it instead. But I'm sure you believe that you make really good choices for your community in terms of how you spend your community budget, but always an option if you feel that the better decisions can be made. In terms of your last point, can you remind me what it was, Councillor Thomas? 71,
Yes,
72, yeah, absolutely right. So yes, it is true that one of the tenants has moved across the city into this location. I guess the point being here is that there is always a risk as companies grow that they may look to move out to the city centre. I'm not saying that that was a risk at this point in time, but it is always a risk, especially when I understand the building that they previously in is due to potentially be renovated in due course. What we didn't want was to lose a company like that from the city centre, so retention is part of our strategy as well. And of course, I'd ask you to be patient, because I think what you'll see is when the other tenants are finalised and announced, that there is additionality of people coming into the city centre who are currently not based there.
Any more questions from anybody? Councillor May.
Thank you. I'd obviously like to respond to Rob and actually pay him a compliment in his what's becoming an annual tribute to me, and I'm very honoured by it. I must say, Rob, this one was the best one yet. I prefer the Doctor Who image to the Peter Pointer one. You've definitely given me an upgrade on that one. Long way we both live in a parallel universe, and let's hope that neither of us will be exterminated in the near future. On that, I'll be having some. We're obviously going to be put forward a couple of amendments which you've all seen, and I'll be asking the 151 officer a couple of technical questions about debt rescheduling and things like that later on. But thank you. You really have excelled yourself this time. Thank you for that.
Okay, Councillor Phillips.
When what did I call them? The Devil's Cabal were running the council. I had a meeting with the then esteemed Chief Executive, Mr. Thorogood, who did such a wonderful job here. He departed for the Falklands. And he said to me in regards to service at Swansea, with the Liberal Democrats would really like to forget a programme that cost millions and produced nothing except made most of our IT staff redundant into a separate company, and then we had to bring it back into it cost a huge amount of money and made nothing like the savings that it was supposed to produce. Mr. Thorogood was telling me about his plans, his pride in this programme, that he wanted Swansea Council to be the best administered council in Great Britain. That they could point to Swansea Council and say, by damn, the way they run that council, it's fantastic. We could have potholes, no children's services, poor education, but by damn, in terms of administration, we would have been the best in Britain.
I don't want to interrupt you, Councillor Phillips, but we need to be asking a question.
I am. Does the leader think that that is an ambition that the Liberal Democrats coalition should really be proud of?
Well, certainly good governance is always something to strive for, because you have to run an effective local authority. But in terms of service at Swansea, I'm on the record many times. I mean, the facts speak for themselves. It did not deliver the savings, as you said, Councillor Phillips. It did not deliver any savings as far as we can identify in terms of that. But what it did do, it did outsource IT services, and eventually those jobs went to Scotland. I'm just very pleased that this Labour Authority and this Labour administration was able to insource those jobs again, create our own in-house IT, which I believe are doing a fantastic job, and of course bring those jobs back to Swansea. So, you know, I think it isn't something to be proud of in terms of the decisions that were made at that time.
I've got to answer that, because I think, yeah, I will answer it, Robert, because I did question as well. But the fact is, Service at Swansea was set up by a previous leader, right? A previous leader, and there's a couple of councillors in this chamber know that's a fact. And I asked them if they would like to speak up, but I don't think they will. it was set up, our own department was excluded. It is a question, just to confirm. Our own department was excluded from bidding for that particular contract. The department that we in the council had in IT was excluded. Now, the person who will give you far more knowledge of this is Councillor Mary Jones, and you know very well, because you quizzed Councillor Mary Jones for 2 hours in a council meeting over it. And you know very well that the contracts with the company were virtually signed by the time we got into power, and the whole setup was set up.
Wishing to speak, so if you want
Right,
to
okay.
bring it in for clarity.
But I will ask you once, am I right in saying that those systems were set up before 2008, actually 2007 they were set up, and our own department was excluded?
I'll need to check the detail on all of that, Councillor Holly, but what I do know is that when an administration comes in, it has the opportunity to review everything that is currently underway and make its decision. You're not passengers on a bus. You are the driver and you are the people going on a journey. So if you don't like something, then you have the right to stop it. I'm sure the chief executive at the time, the chief executive now will say, we give you advice. You make the decisions as politicians. At the end of the day, at the time at which a decision was required, you were in charge. And unfortunately, I think your administration made a bad one.
Thank you. Councillor Mary Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Councillor Holly has addressed some of the points I was going to raise, but I would like to ask, it's going to be awkward to ask the leader because he wasn't actually a councillor at the time. So, and Councillor David Phillips was the outgoing leader who has just made the pronouncement about the service at Swansea. So perhaps I can address my question to either of them and say exactly what Councillor Holly said. Can you please confirm that when we took over, those contracts were almost let? We were given both legal and financial advice to tell us that if we were going to break the chain or go for another company or review it, we would have suffered heavy financial penalties. So do you think that's a good way to use the council's public money on a contract that was possibly minutes from being let before you actually lost the election? There's a lot of things about IT, and I don't think your current way you've been updating Oracle and Fusion, it's gone way over budget, so I don't think you're in a position to actually criticise us. So maybe this year we can put it to bed so that it will not be raised again next year. But I would like an answer to my question. You had already got rid of the in-house team, and you were in the process of going to sign the contract for it to go to Scotland. We actually kept it in this country and for it not to go to Poland. Thank you.
Well, I believe I was a councillor from 2003, and I believe Councillor Phillips was leader of the Labour group from 2004. So I think Councillor Mary Jones's dates are probably a little wrong there in terms of the way she's described some of the bits going on. I can only refer back to...
Point of information. Can I just bring a point of information? I was referring to the previous cabinet, sorry, Councillor Stewart, and you weren't in the previous cabinet because so I was not actually saying you weren't a councillor. I was trying to say when they made the decision.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Okay, but look, I just go back to the core point here, which is, look, when we came to power in 2012, you would rightly hold us to account for any decisions we make after that point. I think, the argument and the chaff that's being thrown up here is a similar one to the metro and the bendy bus, which is, oh, it was something you left for us to sort out. Well, actually, no, you took decisions. You were the administration. You made decisions. You lived by those decisions. They were your decisions. If we were in power, I'm sure we'd have given more challenge and made different decisions. And well, absolutely. This is not a debate. If you want to ask a question, you can put your hand up. I'm sure the presiding member will bring you in. But I think the point being is that administrations make decisions, they have to defend them, and they are made on the advice of officers at the time. The record shows you made the decisions on service at Swansea.
Right, if there are no more questions, I'm moving on to the next item, and that's item 8. And I'd like to call on Mr. Ben Smith, please.
Thank you, presiding member. We go back to the beginning. That was an interesting stretch of time and relative dimension, wasn't it? That was the longest 5 minutes ever, and I am with Councillor May. It was a particularly fetching scarf on this occasion. I would quite happily wear one, that's myself. But I better get a speed on, given the amount of time it's been taken. So in terms of my technical advice on item 8, the medium-term financial plan, some of the bits we've already alluded to in terms of leaders' comments and mine. The recommendation, there's only one in front of you, which is accepted as a planning assumption, merely assumptions, because we don't know what's going to happen in due course. It's my best guesses of advice to you. That is reiterated in section 1.3 in bold, making clear it is based on a raft of assumptions. I will draw your attention to section 2.2, which summarises the material £12 million worth of top-up additions in the settlement, which are baselined into future years. There'll be more on that when we come back to the revenue budget in due course. If I take you to the table, which is probably the most important one in terms of me giving technical advice, which is set out in section 3.3, couple of bits to draw your attention to. The assumptions on both teachers and non-teachers pay is an assumption of 2.5% pay award. We're in our usual position of having no idea what will be settled in due course at national level by both local government employers and the Welsh Government. Inflation ticking up, that may be under some pressure, as I've indicated in the report. I made some other assumptions. There may be some odd items you will feel in this report, so I'll draw your attention to them, which are the items with notes 4 and 5 on them. But before I do that, the missing item is that you'll note that there are no stepped increases in the pension contributions. When I was appointed as your treasurer, the pension fund was in deficit, it turned into surplus, and 3 years ago all stepped increases were removed. And as I allude to later in the report, whilst we haven't yet got the 2025 valuation, we are likely to see further substantial gains on the pension fund as a result of table topping performance. And I must place on record my thanks to Mr. Jeff Dong for that. He runs that particularly on my behalf, and the performance there, whilst overseen by the pension committee and board, is entirely down to his endeavours, and that should be rightly acknowledged. It's one of the biggest single components which has removed an enormous pressure from this council cumulatively over the years. In similar vein, linked to it, the capital charges may look a little bit odd, but that is because in MTFP terms, the budget set for 24-25 took £2 million out of capital financing charges as a result of the windfall gains made on taking money at 1-point-something%. The budget in front of you, which we'll come to in due course, takes a further £3 million out. So to make sure it's only temporary, because I don't like permanent reductions in the base, £1, £2 and £3 million goes back in. The eagle-eyed will spot that in the final year it jumps up another £3 million. That is entirely consistent with the advice I've given you for several years around you have £50 million deferred to a later year when you hope that PWLB rates don't sit at 6%, but more like 3.5% to 4%. So that ballooning element was always in there. It just does look perhaps a little bit odd, more odd this year because it's all pushed to the end. Ordinarily, I'm a little bit sniffy about pushing things to the end of a life cycle, but it is because interest rates are particularly elevated. We won't repeat the 1-point-something% that we achieved previously, but I'm hanging on for dear life for them to come back down to about 3.5%. And you will also note in line 5 the use of the capital equalisation reserve. The revenue budget, which you'll come on to in due course, takes £2.5 million out in 25-26. It proposes to take another £2.5 million out in 26-27, which will be the premise of one of the opposition amendments as to the timing of that. And then you see the following year, the £2.5 million take being put back in. So you're back to a break-even position by the year 27-28. And then you see it being repaid. I will talk about the Section 25 advice in the revenue report, but there is a reason why I've said tut, but then equally said overall I'm satisfied because I've measured it over the lifetime of the MTFP. The rest of the table is in normal format with a number of assumptions that are made, but I did think it was very appropriate for me to draw attention to some of them because they may look a little bit more stretched than usual. And those are particularly set out, those key assumptions, in notes 1 through to 5 in the report. I also set out in note 15, I have assumed an increase in AEF, aggregate external finance, of 1, then 2, then 3% per annum. I have not exactly hugely pushed the boat out because I am a little bit worried that there isn't enormous amounts of growth in the UK economy at the moment. But equally, I've assumed that there will be some settlement for local government over each of the following years, albeit we'll have to wait for the spending review to see what the priorities are. As I alluded to, set out in section 3.7, I've already placed on record my thanks to Mr. Dong, my deputy, for the table-topping performance on the pension fund. So for the purposes of making planning assumptions today, whilst we await the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the end of the month and the spending review in a couple of months' time, it's as good as I can do in terms of my proverbial tea leaf reading, crystal ball gazing. So that's the end of my technical advice, presiding member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions for Mr. Smith, please? Any technical questions? Councillor May.
The one I was going to ask earlier, medium-term financial plan. Interested really about debt rescheduling and how it goes forward. I noticed in 2.17 of your report, you said you've put aside 15.5 million for 24-25, and these are sort of if I get it right, excuse me if I get it wrong, but you've got a repayment of 5 million, say, for example, in March this year, so it's either just been paid or it's about to be paid, which was borrowed at 2.26%. And in June, you've got a repayment of a further 5 million borrowed at 2%. And so going forward, so I've looked at all of the debts we're due to repay in the scope of your medium financial plan years. So it's 5 million this year, 5 million next year, 5 million the year after, changing electoral term. Then we have 19 million and 14 million. That was from the schedule you kindly supplied me in July in response to a council question. I think you partially answered the question in an earlier speech, but just wanted to seek some confirmation. If we're paying off 2 lots of £5 million, both now and in the near future, we've got a debt that was taken out at an interest rate in 96 of 8.38%. We cannot pay that debt off using the money that we have to pay. Do you see what I'm saying? It's all about rescheduling. So basically, it's just going forward on the longer term ones. I know you've done wonders with the interest rates on your borrowing, borrowing as low as 1.91%, but these longer term debt saves back from 99 backwards. We cannot really touch them in the future, even though they're at really, really high interest rates without penalties. That's what you're saying. Just explain it to me. I'm a bit naive on things.
Yes, you've surmised absolutely correctly, and you have spotted that there are indeed some redemptions, a couple of £5 million coming up. Almost all of our borrowing is to maturity, not only stuff taken out by my predecessors, but the stuff I took, as you say, at 1.9%, I borrowed for 50 years. So I'm in the fortunate position, as Mr. Dong, that the very large majority of our maturities are long into the future, but there are always dribs and drabs that will come up for maturity, and we can only repay them at that point in time. If we were to seek to repay them early, either to the PWLB or to try and break it with a commercial lender, they would charge an absolute fortune in terms of a premium, which would have to be charged to the revenue account. So it is not advantageous for us to do that. The leader did mention the lender option, borrower options, loans. I would want to place on record, so that given Councillor Holly's point, that officers made decisions at the time, and to be fair to the Section 151 officer at the time, they were the best rates available at the time. They come with different risks. They are fixed for a variable period of time and then may be recalled. I have taken every opportunity when any lender option, borrower option loan has come up with a break clause, and a lender has said, do you want to take the new inflated rate? I have used words that would not be appropriate for me to use in public society, and I've just called their bluff and paid it off in their entirety, simply because I had a big enough cash pile to be able to do it. So you're absolutely right, Councillor May. We are effectively forced to sit on the ones. There are a couple at 2% that were taken out a while ago that will drop out. We're lucky that the very vast majority is built in at that 1.9 and 2 point something %, which means the trick for me is to try and keep that average cost of borrowing nearer to 3.5%. Remember, the trick done in the first place was entirely to, as I explain it roughly, we swapped £400 million worth of debt at 6% average pool rate for 600 million at 4%, and effectively it's the same cost of servicing the debt. You are right, there is still a need to repay it. And both you and the leader are right that on average it's been 14 or 15 million pounds a year set aside in terms of MRP, because we can't actually physically repay it until they come due. And as your eagle eye has spotted, one is due later this month, one in a couple of months' time. I've repaid 20 million pounds worth of Lobos, which you will see in the Treasury Management statement looking back. And there will be a need to, at some point, externalise new future debt. So I think, yeah, it's the most complicated part of what we do. It's when we get onto this later item that I always say it's the boring bit, but it's the important bit. Get it good, you get really good returns. Get it wrong, you blow yourself up. But you've surmised it entirely correctly, Councillor May.
Thank you, Ms. Councillor Rice.
Okay, thank you. A technical question here for you, Section 151 officer. In terms of the record investments that the council administration has made, I take, for example, 71, 72, the Kingsway, or the new public sector hub. Is there expected over the medium-term financial plan to be more income than the cost of the borrowing? And I mean, in sense of net income from those investments in rents or overpayments?
Very simple answer, no. Not in terms of overall, not only in terms of ones you've referenced, which do have some income generation, and there will be future income streams, but you'll be well aware that the very vast majority of the 210 million I've borrowed over a number of years in advance, only in advance of actual spend, but in line with the MTFP, is on the basis that a very large amount of what we do in our public service goods, which are not in themselves income generating. Some of them do generate an income, but they do not cover the costs of the borrowing, even at those relatively low rates. And that is part of the regeneration, placemaking, place shaping intention. And the reality is, whilst non-domestic rates is pooled nationally and then sent back locally, there is a small element of non-domestic rate gain. The Swansea Bay City deal is the only deal in Wales to get that revenue sharing deal. There is an amount in this year's revenue support grant for the very first time ever, which tops up us for having grown the non-domestic rating base. I wouldn't want to overplay it. It's not huge, but it is the start of paying back some of the principal, that there is an additional dividend as well as any income streams that flow through to the corporate property function in terms of the letting out of facilities. And of course, I'm only interested as your treasurer directly in the impact on the council. The leader and others have made quite clear that there are a number of spillover wider economic development regeneration gains to the city. If it brings jobs, if it brings employment, if it brings spend, I don't factor them into our budget. But I was never expecting it to be fully washing its face. That was always the principle of the advice I gave 7 or so years ago when it came to making that decision to commit to taking £210 million with quite a lot of risk and quite a lot of nervousness on my part in terms of at what point to externalise it. And you've heard me say a number of times, I'm just grateful this punk got lucky and timed it very well. Just got lucky and then made a bit in the meantime, which you've got used to in year in terms of delivering stellar Treasury Management returns as a courtesy of Mr. Dong's operation.
Yeah, just to come back to clarify something on what you said. So in the year 25-26, if I was to take the public sector hub, the section, 71, 72 Kingsway, and say I pop in Skyline as well, would it be about £1.1 million taken out of the revenue account to service those debts?
That's one way of saying it. My counter would be that I'd fully factored in all of the stepped increases in borrowing in the medium-term financial plan at the point at which I took the £210 million worth of borrowing, and it was appropriately allocated in due course. So that's probably all I'd want to say on that. You're well aware that there was a trade-off, and the discussion and decision was taken at the time on my advice that there was a clear trade-off and there was a need to put more into capital financing, and for any given revenue sum overall there would be less. But as the leader has said in his update, you've seen quite significant increases in aggregate external finance. So I think you'd be right to say, compared to what it could have been if there'd been no borrowing ever, yes, there is a reduction in the amount available for revenue, but the alternative would have been there would have been nothing done in the city. That's a political choice for you lot, frankly, to debate, and I will, with the greatest of respect, not answer any further on that part, and I think you'll understand why.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Leader.
Yeah, just to add to what Mr. Smith said, I think Mr. Smith is selling himself short because I think he made an excellent decision. There was no way that interest rates were going to go any lower, and I think therefore he took the right decision, and that's been proved to be correct. Now that interest rates are up at 5-6%, so that's absolutely right. I think Councillor Rice has tried to frame a question in a way that's inaccurate and misleading, because it's never been the intention for any of these schemes to pay back in the period of an MTFP. You certainly wouldn't do that. I mean, there are schemes that we can say, for instance, like the Palace Theatre, where the GVA impacts to the city do pay back in a 3-year period. Absolutely. But you're not going to pay off the borrowing. It is correct. Check the figures. I'm sure that there have been conversations with the press with some people around what that final figure is. But certainly the GVA figure, which is public, shows that that will match our investment in a 3-year period. So I would say it's framed in a way that tries to sensationalize it. But I think, as Mr. Smith said, it's not just what you're spending in terms of the capital investment, what it gets you. And I don't think there's ever going to be a Labour administration that isn't going to want to build schools, that isn't want to go invest in jobs and opportunities for the people in the city, isn't going to want to invest in better social care facilities. That is what we do as an authority. Councillor Rice seems to see the cost of everything and the value of nothing.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm going to move to the recommendation, and it's that. Oh, sorry, got to have a proposal and a second of it.
Very happy to move, Chair.
Thank you. And a second.
Very happy to second.
Okay, right. The recommendation is that the medium-term financial plan 26-27 to 28-29 as be approved as the basis for future service financial planning. So can I have a show of hands and support, please? Those against? Any abstentions? Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 9. And again, it's going to be, I'll read out, it's the 151 officer to give his technical presentation. And then councillors can ask technical questions of the section 151. Councillor Rob Stewart to propose and Councillor Andrew Lewis to second the report, and I'll allow debate on each political group amendment in order that they were received, and the copy of each amendment has been circulated to all councillors. There are 2 budget amendments, okay? So we'll go on to Mr. Ben Smith, please.
Thank you, Presiding Member. The main revenue budget in front of you, subject to the discussions and debate to follow, have 2 recommendations around approving the budget and consequent impact on the budget requirement and council tax levy. The report itself, section 1.6, in terms of technical advice, reiterates what the leader has already said. Yes, there are savings in the budget proposals, but there is a net over £50 million going in. In section 2, I remind, as I've reminded Cabinet through the year, services are overspending, but there has been an element of rebasing the budget to recognise significant gaps in both homelessness and social care. Section 3 sets out the local government settlement, both the provisional settlement and the final settlement. There was very little change between final and provisional, and Cabinet did delegate to me authority to make any technical adjustments, as is normally the case, given it's a very compressed timescale. It includes money for teachers' pay, teachers' pensions, and a number of transfers, particularly again in terms of homelessness, which were incredibly useful for the authority in setting a budget. The leader made reference that one of the other technical changes is in relation to the local government borrowing initiative, which came out literally the afternoon of Cabinet. I'd guessed £7.1 million for that and built that into the papers, both for revenue as a specific grant, and it will go into core funding next year and into capital. Unfortunately, this punt got lucky again. The settlement for us is £7,097,000, difference of £3,000. Fortunately, I'm over, so I meet the obligation to put 60 and 40% into the capital budget. I'm sure you'll debate that in due course. Table 1A sets out, and again, I won't go into the detail, the italics is used to indicate changes I have made on a technical basis between Cabinet and Council, and because there was very little in terms of changes at final settlement, it effectively reflects all of the amendments that Cabinet asked me to take into account moved on the day, plus those minor technical amendments. Inflation, as I've alluded to, is a little bit choppy at the moment. It's not gone back up to the high levels it was, but it's going higher, and that may have some bearing on pay awards in due course. Schools prioritisation, as has been indicated, heavily prioritised again. Just under £12 million uplift cash to cash, but as the leader indicated in his presentation, I'm perfectly happy with the figures quoted. Because that included one-off money, it is worth over £23 million. Capital financing, I've already said in my overarching advice that on the MTFP, I've taken £3 million temporarily out, banking some of the dividends from the Treasury Management windfall as a result of borrowing at low rates and having a bonus, as it were, in terms of capital equalisation reserve. But it's only taken out on a temporary basis because I don't like one-off tricks. I like things to be spread over the lifetime, as it were. The 4.22 makes clear that there are future changes and pressures on borrowing, but equally does bank the gains from the minimum revenue provision policy statement that was approved in 2018. Section 4.24 again references the LGBI. It's peppered throughout as it needs to be in terms of the changes. The rest of the report sets out in normal fashion the tables, the changes made at Cabinet, my technical adjustments, which you will see are on the small side. Not one of them is over 100 grand, so I consider them to be technical. I do adopt an approach of being a bit of an international supermodel here. I don't get out of bed for less than 100 grand, sweetie, is the approach I take on these things. And I think Cabinet and Council indulge me on that in terms of recognising the relatively minor nature of them in the overall budget. In terms of my advice, I am obliged to give you an assurance as to the adequacy of the budget or otherwise and the level of reserves, my so-called Section 25 report. I indicate in Section 8.7 that our general reserves are on the low end, and as the budget keeps growing by quite a bit, proportionately they're going lower, so they will need topping up at some point. I just remind you that that is an inevitability. The leader in his slides, and again, as I've referenced in 8.15, there has been a review of the insurance fund and 2 draws of £3 million has been permitted by myself on the basis of actuarial advice. I have considered the adequacy of reserves and risks, and I'm broadly happy, but I have set out in section 9.1, I'm having to give you advice on a budget requirement without knowing what's happening on national insurance. I'll come back to that in a moment. Therefore sets out a series of recommendations, which, as the leader referenced, is a council tax increase of 5.95% and a bandy charge accordingly. The two bits that are important in the long list of risks are around risks around care home fees, given there is a commercial contract and debate still to be had with providers, and that is exacerbated this year by national insurance. And then the 2 modifications to my full assurance. Normally you would expect me to give full assurance on the budget. I am not able to quite do so. I have pointed out that there is a use by the administration of the capital equalisation reserve not to smooth capital charges but to smooth the revenue budget. But as I said in the MTFP, I'm satisfied overall because the amounts being taken out are broadly repaid over the lifetime. But it is also the basis of one of the opposition amendments in terms of what's the right thing to do in terms of timing. And one that should not surprise you because it has been subject to an enormous amount of national debate and remains entirely up in the air because we await the UK government's bill on national insurance becoming an act, and at the moment I have estimated £7 million worth of reimbursement. You will have heard a number of other authorities saying they do not know what they're going to get in terms of direct national insurance compensation. It's not only what do I get or not get in terms of direct national insurance compensation, which I might not know until June, but it is what the impact may be on particularly social care providers, other direct providers to us, and the general inflationary pressures that are around. So it's unusual for me to modify my Section 25 assurance statement, but I have for those 2 reasons. And as I've said, you've got to weigh that. There isn't much you can do about the national insurance one because you're stuck in the same position as everyone else, and you do have to weigh the one on the use of the capital equalisation reserve, but I have deemed it overall to be lawful and reasonable when viewed over the lifetime. So take that advice in the manner in which it is intended is my technical advice. The rest of it will be subject to, I'm sure, debate and any technical advice I need to give on opposition amendments in due course. That's the end of my technical advice on this one, presiding member. Thank you.
Smith, any questions for Mr. Smith? Any technical questions? Can I call on somebody to move on the report, please?
Very happy to move, Chair.
Seconded.
Happy to second.
Okay, we'll then move to the amendment first, which is coming from the Lib Dem amendment, please.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Can I move the amendment that would reduce council tax from 5.95 to 3.95? Whilst this would cost to reduce council tax, the cost it would be roughly 3.2 million. But when you take out the CTRS, which is the reduction for council council tax, that cost comes down to 2.618 million, and that would be taken out of the capital equalised reserve, which has more than enough money in it. Now, I know that the current administration has done that. In the years gone past, the leader has told us that they can't do that. You can't take it out of the reserve, and yet you've done it this year. So if you'd done it this year, you could have done it every other year. Back before 2016, this money was put back into the revenue budget. Put back in the revenue budget to help pay for council tax. That is over £30 million since then. So effectively, the leader keeps on saying about, oh, that gimmick of 0% increase costs so much money. Well, in reality, you've taken £30 million out of it. You don't nod your head because it's true. The money that you take out of the equalised reserve normally was put back into the revenue account to make sure that revenue account had that money in that could be used for social services, education, but also help council tax. We've come to a perfect storm. We had a cut in the fuel money from the government. We've had massive increases in energy and in food prices. And today, I don't know many of you have actually had your water bill. And all you know, Danny Rez, did you actually read it? And it's frightening. It's gone up, in my case, 25%. And if you live in other parts of Swansea, it's gone up by 27, 30%. What I'm asking you to do today is to give the people of Swansea a break. Show the rest of Wales that we can look after the budget. Show the people of Wales that we can keep our council tax low. Remember, you have borrowed, and I say you, collectively, the council, under the cabinet, have borrowed over £200 million for projects. Much of that has not been spent. And we've used that money to lend to other organisations, and we've acted like a merchant bank. Well, good luck, because that's, good management of finance. And I thank Councillor Smith for that. Oh, Councillor Smith, sorry to insult you. Anyway, you're not paid at that level. Anyway, so the reality is, what I'm asking you to do is to support this amendment. Support this amendment to give the people of Swansea a break from the perfect storm of price increases that we are currently going through. There's more than enough money in the equalisation fund to do this. And I ask you to give the people of Swansea a break. Thank you.
And for your, please, Chris. Second. Okay, thank you. Leader.
Didn't seem very sure about that then, Presiding Member. Anyway, let's get cut to the numbers on this one. I think look, there's a couple of issues with this revenue amendment. So firstly, I've never said you can't use the capital equalisation reserve. I've cautioned against using it in the way that's suggested here. And the reason for that is because, again, the same mistake as Councillor Rice made last year is that you are treating council tax as a one-year hit. And as I laid out in my presentation, a change to council tax is a recurring hit. So first thing is, it isn't going to cost 2.618 million. It's going to cost 2.618 million this year, next year, the year after, the year after, the year after. And Mr. Smith, I'll be coming to you for some advice shortly. I believe your advice to me, if we were to attempt to do this, because we've had to strike a balance in terms of pressures, is that anything we take out, we'd have to put back in next year. And that would either have to be funded by cuts to teachers, cuts to social workers, cuts to communities, or you would have to raise council tax by the equivalent amount next year. So we'd be starting the year next year with a 2% Lib Dem council tax premium on the council taxpayers of Swansea. It's sleight of hand politics, it's smoke and mirrors, going lower this year to go higher next year or to cut deeper next year. It's an ill thought out amendment. It costs far more than the numbers that are stated in here. I welcome Mr. Smith's technical advice on this one in terms of would this be permitted to stand and would it have to be repaid or rebalanced next year? Thank you, Chair. So for that reason, Chair, can't support the amendment.
Mr. Smith, sorry.
Thank you, presiding member. Yes, as I've been asked to give technical advice, the advice I gave to the administration, given that they are taking money out of the Capital Equalisation Reserve in 25-26 and 26-27, is, as the leader said, I've required full Rumpelstiltskin style to have it repaid to me. I demand a tithe on that when I turn flax into gold. So the medium-term financial plan, which you approved, put it all back in future years. So the leader is right to say that if it's taken out once, it either becomes a permanent recurring problem. It's not as that's not what is being suggested in terms of this amendment. So I'm satisfied the amendment stands. But my technical advice would be in accordance with what the leader has presumed, which is if it's taken out for a year, it goes back in the following year. Now, to some extent, that becomes then a timing issue and debate. The administration has got 2 draws from Capital Equalisation Reserve over 2 years. This amendment says do it all in 1 year. It would mean a much lower council tax one-off, but the leader is right to everything else being equal, it would have to go back in the following year and it becomes somewhat more distorting. That is a legitimate policy choice for members. Do you want to go lower now and higher next year or stick with what you've got? So my technical advice is the amendment is in order, but the leader's presumption is right. And to be fair to the opposition amendment, they have not made any presumption about it being base. They've made it to be one-off, but I do accept equally they don't then have to bring forward the budget next year, which I think is why the leader has rightly pointed out the concerns about the future year impact. I would just make one final observation. It is a political choice for the chamber, but it is already one of the lowest council taxes. I get entirely where Councillor Holly is coming from. I'm not going to admit to the increase in my water bill. I nearly fainted in terms of what it came through at. I don't know what I've been watering, but the reality is, it would be a way of relieving some of the pressures on households, which I think is well intentioned, but at 3.95, that would be by far and away the lowest in Wales. There are a number at high 4s, there's a few in 5s, the vast majority are 7, 8, 9, 10. And there is a danger that if you go cheap 1 year, you may go dear in another year. But I'm perfectly happy the amendment stands at a technical level, but the leader's concerns are right to be flagged to the chamber. Councillor Holly may wish to equally come back now that I've given technical advice, but I assure you I am satisfied the amendment in itself stands, and that's why I allowed it. Thank you, presiding member.
Any questions? Councillor Holly, you want to come in for a minute?
To say that we will have to pay it back next year, let's be blunt about it. But if we set the level today, next year we have to set another level. Nobody says that level next year has to include this year's reduction. It does not say it. What he said was the potential could be lower because you start off lower. It's the same with all council tax. Whatever figure you start off with, whatever figure you appreciate onto. The fact is, I don't care if it is, I want it to be the lowest in Wales. I want people to say, well, how did Swansea do that? How did Swansea achieve the lowest council tax in Wales? How do we do that? And we did it through using the money we have. I'm sorry you can't support it, Leader, because this really does help the people of Swansea. And if you think that by not doing it, I appreciate what the Section 151 officer says, but it's a legitimate amendment, and I hope members could support it. Thank you.
Chair, point of order. I think Councillor Holly has tried to re-describe the technical officer's advice. The technical officer was very clear that the money, if it comes out, has to go back in one way or another, and it has to balance over the term. So I will repeat the point. Yes, it technically can come out this year, but it has to go back in at some point. And that means either raising council tax at a future point or making cuts. And I'm not prepared to put teachers, social workers, or other staff's jobs at risk for a gimmick.
Okay.
I get this. I really do annoyed about this gimmick business. This is a legitimate amendment passed by legal and by finance. It's not a gimmick. This is for the people of this city. It's not about anything else. And if you think it's a gimmick, you are part of that gimmick. You are, because this went through the legal process, it's through the financial process. If it was a danger to next year, I'm sure the Section 151 officer would not allow it to go through. So that's it.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I think I just should stand to say that I can't support this amendment. And the reason I can't support it, for me, was clearly displayed in the Leader's budget presentation earlier with the historical 0% council tax that was awarded by the Lib Dems. It clearly set out that year on year on year, that amount of money that we've lost. And this is perfectly relative to what the Lib Dems are proposing now. So I can't support it.
Councillor Black.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, what is being proposed here is very similar to what the Leader's already proposed in terms of the council tax. He's taking money out himself. So if you have to put the money back, exactly the same applies. But I have to say about this 0% council tax back in 2012, you know, that you may well make the point now that yes, we added up and this money taken out. It's money going into people's pockets. But more importantly, not a single one of you opposite voted against that. So you're equally culpable, you're equally culpable in terms of what you're saying. Actually, the implications of that 0% council tax is, and the people of Swansea benefited from that, and they're continuing to benefit from that, and that's what we think this amendment should do now.
Any more questions? No. Oh. Proposed and seconded. So can I have a show of hands in support of the amendment, please? Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that amendment has fallen. So we'll move on to the next amendment, and it's coming from the Uplands Group, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a nice straightforward amendment, which hopefully everybody around the room can support. I'm going to introduce it, and I'll pass over to my colleague afterwards to talk about some of the rationale behind some of the expenditure. So to put it simply, this financial year, we spent approximately £1.8 million on spot hire vehicle costs. Okay, and that's quite a substantial amount of money. I'm not going into the ins and outs, or if all the vehicles are used, or if some of them have been stood still for 6 months. I think, you know, I think that's for another day. However, what I am saying today is that I think for next year's budget, we should keep the costs for spot hire vehicle costs at the 24-25 levels, which actually saves around £350,000. Because if you look at it, it's going up by 20%. What else is going up by 20%? Yeah. So water rates, perhaps, but it's going up by 20%. So I think that's a key thing to bear in mind. Okay. Inflation's running around 3%. Why is this going up by 20%? So what would I use that money on if I had it available to me? Well, I think on a much better and much more important priority. And the thing that I want to talk about before I hand over to my colleague is about this removing the proposed saving, which sits in the revenue budget. It's about the in-house home care, domiciliary care. So what are we doing? We're saving £250,000 by making sure that the people who, as the leader said earlier, are working extremely hard, are going to have to work more than they are now, and potentially work less times in people's homes. This is not a good idea, guys. This is, as to say the truth, I think this is a dumb idea, because it has so many potential knock-on effects. One, everybody who has home care would probably like to have more contact with the people that come home caring. If people don't get sufficient home care, they go into more expensive forms of care, and sometimes they can end up in hospitals. And so it costs a lot of money in the system. And I think for something that could be taken out and replaced by something which seems to be overinflated, then it just makes logical sense. So I will also then hand over to Peter, who I understand wants to say a lot more about the environmental enforcement, which we think is important, because if you invest in fly tipping enforcement, then in return you get some savings elsewhere and a better environment.
Okay, thank you. In seconding this amendment, as I said, Councillor Rice has said I'll be dealing with the £100,000 we're proposing for fly tipping in enforcement. As I've said before in this chamber, the operatives that clear up our fly tipping actually deserve a medal. It's other people's mess. It's not a pleasant job. But it seems that their work is in vain, really, because society is producing this mess for clearing up. As soon as they clear one piece up, then more fly tipping appears elsewhere. There isn't actually a deterrent at the moment in this city. There's education, but there's not a deterrent. I'd like to see £100,000 given, for use of it, as the cabinet member who I know feels strongly about this too, into the department, either say for cameras or things to assist getting that enforcement or a prosecution, because I think it would be an invest to save. If a message was put out there that people will get fined if they fly tip, or there is some comeback. We've got cases going on locally that have been going on for 18 months without resolution. So genuinely, I think it would complement the hard work that our operatives are doing in clearing up the continual fly tipping, to see that they're actually getting an end result to it. And it's just simple, and that's the basis of it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know other cabinet members may want to comment on parts of this. Look, I can understand why the amendment's been put, but reality is the advice I've had from officers does sort of underline the fact that this is a bit of an Elon Musk style amendment, which is it seems to want to do stuff, but really it's going to undermine and probably crash things if it goes through. The suggestion by Councillor Rice about just freezing spot hire because it looks like it's going up. Well, the reason there's investment there is because it's needed. So spot hire, if people aren't aware what it is, it allows us flexibility within the fleet to cater for shorter term requirements, usually less than 3 years, such as seasonal work, additional temporary demands, covering vehicles off the road maintenance issues, staff attending courses or meetings outside of the county, particularly when a long-term financial commitment would otherwise be required. Spot hire has the advantage of not committing the council expenditure beyond the actual requirements. So in essence, it's an invest to save. It gives us flexibility, it gives us cover, it gives us contingency. So again, without this, if we were to reduce or freeze the budget, there would be significant frontline disruption, and that is the advice from the technical officer on this: is do not do it. It will cause you problems. It will make your services less efficient and less effective. In terms of the increase in the environmental enforcement, again, there is significant investment, as I said in the presentation, going in to cleansing and waste. The teams are being enhanced there. The technical advice I have on this specifically is it's not a money problem in that respect, because I do disagree. I think the words chosen by Councillor May were probably ill-judged. He probably tripped over his words. The officers do enforce, and we do have penalty notices. There is a deterrent, but it's not often strong enough for people who are willful fly tippers. And I don't think for some people there will ever be a strong enough deterrent in that respect. Members will know when they've been dealing with fly tipping in their wards, our teams go out, they do try and identify who the perpetrators are. It is a challenging situation legally when it is on private land or where there are other issues. It is not a quick process to resolve. So again, I think a well-intentioned one. We will continue to have the resources that are required to do a great job in trying to deal with fly tipping. But the advice on this one is the extra money would not make any difference, given that we are working to capacity to try and deal with those issues at the moment. And then finally, in terms of the amendment around social care and the changes there, again, Councillor Gibbard will want to no doubt say more, but we have a transformation programme in social care at the present time. The plan is around making sure we reduce the cost of in-house provision by rearranging the case workloads. But as was said in Cabinet, and I think as in scrutiny as well, we are delivering far more care this year than we ever have before. The transformation programme is working to reach people earlier in the process, to keep them healthier for longer, not leaving people to get more unwell or more unable to look after themselves, and therefore having to have higher degrees of care than they otherwise would have. So the process that the officers are taking forward of prevention and early intervention is really working. This is a continuation of that, which is not a cut to the social care budget, because social care budget's going up by nearly 15%, £25 million. It's about how you target that to get the most effective social care you can. But I'm sure Councillor Gibbard will say even more.
Yeah, just to add to what the leader said, this is an overly simplistic interpretation of what we're proposing. And yes, there may be some increase of caseloads, but that is also going to be done through the reviewing of care packages, making sure that they are right sized. You know, in some cases, some people's care packages might be able to be reduced because of the excellent care that they have been getting. We will not be leaving anybody without the care that they need. And as the leader says, it's a key part of a number of changes that we're implementing in our transformation programme as we move towards our new target operating model, which is, so it can't be seen in isolation. Alongside this, we are investing in our prevention and our early intervention to try and reduce the number of people receiving more intensive managed care. So I can't support this amendment.
Anybody else wishing to speak? I'm just going to call Mr. Smith in. Do you have any technical answers or anything you want to say, Mr. Smith, please?
Not particularly, presiding member. It is allowable as a technical amendment in the sense that it's money in, money out. But I did give advice both to the administration, to the leader, and also to the opposition amendment that I was equally concerned about how practical it was. Anyone can remove an individual item from the budget. I was concerned that there may be operational impacts. And also part of the reason that spot hire costs have gone up is almost inextricably linked to higher costs of spot hire, simply because interest rates have gone up. So the alternative comparison would be lease costs. And so I was concerned that whilst allowable from a pure money point of view, and the leader has given his technical officer advice from others other than myself as to why he felt that was inappropriate, and I do share those concerns, notwithstanding the amendment itself was technically balanced and so allowable by me as the Section 151 officer.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Okay, it's been moved and seconded, so I'm going to move to the vote. So all those in favour of the amendment, please show of hands. All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's 4. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, no abstentions. Okay. Okay, that amendment has fallen. So we go back to substantive motion.
Sorry, presiding member, I abstained online.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Abstentions from Councillor Mary Jones. Okay. Right. We go back to the substantive motion then, and it's an opportunity now to debate that. If anybody's got any questions or anything.
Chair, nothing further to add. I think we've had a good debate on it already. Okay. So
it's been moved and seconded, yeah. Okay, so we'll move to the vote on this then. So all in favour of the substantive motion? All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a break now because we've been going for over 2 hours. So we'll break for 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, everybody, if you can take your seats, please. Thank you. The quicker you sit, the quicker we start. Okay, everybody. Can I just remind the people that are online, if you can keep your cameras on, you should be able to be seen at all times, please. So make sure your cameras are on. Thank you. Okay, we move on to the next item then, which is item 10. And I'd like to call on Mr. Ben Smith again, please. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I can be relatively brief on the Housing Revenue Account report. Members will be aware that there is a cap on social rents at 2.7% as set out in the report, which does limit what can be done in revenue. You will also be aware that there is normally a very substantial revenue contribution to capital. That is still the case, but as set out in the report and alluded to in the leaders' comments and presentation, I have had to give some technical advice behind the scenes because there are risks to the Housing Revenue Account which affect all 11 stockholding authorities and registered social landlords. So whilst you are, of course, all in charge, I am merely your servant. This is one of those occasions where the Section 151 officer does raise his proverbial eyebrow and say, there is a reason for me asking that you top up the HRA reserves to protect the HRA position because of technical risks. And I echo what the leader has said. It would be my intention that you, if and when those technical risks are alleviated, that you return to normal practice, as it were, and you would see a reduction in reserves and an increase in the revenue contribution to capital. So I'll say no more than that. I did answer some questions to great detail at scrutiny on it, but there is a reason for it. It is hoped to be temporary. It affects all HRA stockholding authorities, and I hope that normal service will resume in due course. But that's the reason for one or two of the figures that may, for those of you that are long serving, wonder why they look a bit extreme compared to normal. That's the end of my technical advice on this one. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Presiding Member, and thank you to Mr. Smith for the introduction. I don't intend to say too much on this report. Members have had it in advance, but just to highlight a few things of importance. So you will see in the projected revenue out to 24-25, we have had significant spend on the backlog of maintenance and repairs, and that projected overspend is now around £6 million. I'm pleased to say that after the writing of this report, the backlog of maintenance repairs, which has been developed because of the pandemic, is now addressed. So that's good news, but we still need, as you can see in 2.2, to get under the skin of why those repairs are so expensive. And that's why we've got a specialist panel made up of housing and building services to do a comprehensive review and look at that. And we've also procured APSI to do a deep dive into that as well, so that we can prevent overspend in repairs moving forward. As Mr. Smith alluded to, there was a bit of slippage in the capital programme, which has impacted the revenue in terms of less borrowing. So the slippage is £4 million on the revised budget of 53 million. And this will result in reduced borrowing costs. However, it'll also impact the future capital programme with some schemes deferred to ensure that it's affordable, which Mr. Smith alluded to. Mr. Smith mentions the rental income, which was relatively low, 2.7% increase that Council agreed following Welsh Government's rent policy. But just to mention that our business plan did predicate for 5%. So we did have a much lower rental increase than we were expecting. And of course, that has had an impact on the budget as well. And then we've got an additional 900,000 in the 25-26 budget for flooring, because the new Act requires councils to put flooring. So whenever a property becomes vacant or is a new property, we will put flooring in. And that is at the moment at an estimated cost of around 900,000. The main changes, which I won't go through in detail, are in the table in 4.1.5 and in 4.1.6. Income, I'm pleased to say, is expected to exceed expenditure next year, making an operational surplus of 29 million, and that will be invested in More Homes Capital Programme that the leader mentioned in his budget update in terms of £56 million in the next financial year. The risks and uncertainties, I do feel that I should point out that Welsh Government are asking all councils to introduce the Welsh Housing Quality Standard Round 2, which is Welsh Housing Quality Standard 2023. And at this point, we deem that to be very unaffordable because we're estimating that will cost £900 million. I was in a recent meeting around the Welsh Housing Quality Standard with Welsh Government officials recently, and I did highlight that unless Welsh Government give us money, then we have to prioritise other things. And the Welsh Government officials acknowledged that in the meeting as well. Mr Smith referred to reserves, so I won't mention anything further on that because that's been covered. And you'll see in Appendix 1 the proposed budget for 25-26 and the Table B in terms of the movement of reserves. I so move the report. Happy to take any questions, Presiding Member.
Anybody in the chamber? I've got Mr Will Thomas online. Councillor Thomas?
Chair, just before
Oh, sorry.
have to second the report.
Councillor Will Thomas?
Thank you, Presiding Member. And it's not a question, but more of a request, really. I mean, the Cabinet member's been kind enough to look into it in the past, but I do think multi-generational housing from a social housing point of view would make sense in this day and age. A lot of people suffering with isolation and a lot of parents struggling with childcare. It seems to make sense to me. I grew up in a house where my grandparents, well, both my grandmothers lived with us, very helpful for childcare and for social isolation for them. So I do think it's worth a pilot personally, worth a go for the council to look into. And I do think it's something that a family or lots of families could benefit from. So if you could keep it on your radar, it would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thomas? Yeah.
Yes, I've spoken with Councillor Thomas in the past, and I know that this is something which is close to his heart. I do think that it's something worth exploring. However, when we look at a lot of our council properties, I'm sure members who have those in their wards will realise it's very difficult to put a granny annex in a garden that's not large enough to take that. And also, you know, it's quite complicated, but we'll continue to look at it. And I think there are other things that other councils are doing in terms of loft conversion. And that is something that perhaps we could discuss with officers as well for expanding families. Rather than moving them to 4-bedroom properties, we could perhaps convert a 3-bedroom loft to make it a 4-bedroom. So it's something we definitely could look at going forward.
Any more questions? If not, we'll move to the recommendation. Then it's been moved and seconded. So the recommendation is that the budget proposal stated in section 4 be approved. So can I show of hands in support, please? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. We now move on to item 11, and that's the capital budget programme. And I'm going to call on Mr Smith, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I'll start with a very brief technical piece of advice. This is a BBB capital budget, a blinking big budget. Having had a relatively fallow £400 million capital programme, we're back to an over £500 million one, which is the advice I gave to Cabinet. More seriously, the report sets out a raft of schemes, refreshes, updates, reprofiles. It starts to build in indicative sums for the Sustainable Communities for Learning, which are in outline case only. And as I discussed at great length in scrutiny and at Cabinet, I've had to tread an appropriate line between putting as much as I can in the public domain to make sure that there are some figures on the record for indicative budgets versus a number of items that were themselves individually exempt and on yellow pages. And that does necessarily limit some of the discussion and debate on individual schemes around their funding. The report makes clear that the up to £50 million worth of deferred borrowing, which you've heard about for years from me, is now nominally committed. There'll be some more on that in the Treasury Management Statement update. Although nominally committed, it's still the case that there will be some slippage. I'm still doing internal borrowing, and I still anticipate that I would not need to externalise that borrowing for a number of years. But I think that concludes all I need to say on this in terms of technical advice on the budget itself, Presiding Member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Chair, I covered the capital budget report in my presentation, so I'll just formally move.
Councillor Rice.
I've one technical question for Mr. Smith. Can you confirm that the just over £8 million put aside for Skyline is unsupported borrowing to finance it?
Mr. Smith, do you want to respond?
So I tread carefully, given the specifics of the individual scheme and may be themselves privileged, but you are right to assume that short-term an element of it is unsupported borrowing. But as I've indicated in scrutiny, my view over the lifetime of the project is that that is unsupported borrowing that would be potentially fully repaid in terms of the future income streams. A bit of a different answer to the more general question I was asked earlier. But that is a reasonable assumption to make at this point in time. I will say no more because otherwise I run the risk of inadvertently revealing what's on yellow pages as opposed to the spend side on public pages. And I hope that Councillor Rice accepts the reason for me treading slightly carefully on that.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, happy to second the report.
Councillor Stewart, do you bring in an amendment? It's done. Oh, I've got one down for you as well, so it's not, no?
Apologies, Chair. Yes, I've already moved the amendment as part of the capital budget presentation. So again, I alluded to the fact that there was £1 million unallocated within the capital programme. I have responded to Mr. Smith's call at Cabinet and proposed that that £1 million gets allocated to fund a second year of improvements for the changing rooms mentioned in my presentation to upgrade facilities in our parks. So that would see a further £1 million taking the total investment to £2 million over 2 years.
I believe you've got to take a vote on that amendment. Am I correct?
It's an alteration to a motion that you've already submitted. So in terms of the procedure rules, we just need to have council's consent to make that amendment tonight. And then it can be, we'll go to the
amendment.
Uplands amendment. So can we have a vote on just whether you can move the amendment?
Can we fully express it in writing so we know what it is?
It actually should be in writing. I don't know whether we have anything written down.
Yeah, Chair, the advice I had before the meeting was that I would move it in the meeting. It's in the slide, so it's been written down as to what it is.
As long as you've got it, yes. As long as we've got a copy of it somewhere.
If it assists, presiding member and the monitoring officer, the leader is quite right. It is in his slides. You've given advice that he may move it without notice because it's an alteration. I am quite clear that having called at Cabinet, if there was any ask from, so to give members the advice, there is £1 million which was in contingency for 25-26 onwards. Cabinet made a decision to move the £1 million for 25-26, and that is reflected in these papers. The leader's slides indicated that he wished to move £1 million, which is held in capital contingency for 26-27, into those changing room facilities. I am quite clear in my mind what the ask is, and I am able to give effect to that. I have also weighed that as it's a proposal for 26-27, it's an indicative proposal for the following year's budget, there will still be an opportunity for discussion and debate in setting the 26-27 budget and an opportunity for scrutiny if any was required in due course. And that's why I'm satisfied that it can be moved as an alteration without written notice. I'm quite clear in my mind what it is, and I'm satisfied from a technical point of view. I hope that assures members accordingly.
It's okay, we've got to take a vote that the amendment's been approved. So can I have a show of hands in support of that amendment, please? Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's moved anyway. So we go back to the original, the amendment from the Uplands thing. Anybody?
Thank you. Yes, I'm just presenting a very simple amendment, but there is a bit of a story behind it. So you can see by the amendment, I'm suggesting removal of the reference to Skyline over 2 years of the capital programme, which is in total 8,072,000. In my mind, the capital programme really shows what priorities a council has and what it wants to be able to spend its money on. And my concern is the priority that this is given over other subjects. In terms of Skyline, I understand obviously that planning as a group passed their planning permission on Tuesday. But I believe that there are still concerns about a financial investment going into Skyline. My concerns are potentially the robustness of the business case. This is unsupported borrowing, what the guarantees are for any forms of repayment, because they're not clear to me. And also in terms of the actual scheme going ahead, what's the guarantees of being able to retrieve any of the £8 million? I just saw today that there was a similar, not exactly the same, but similar scheme in Merthyr for £300 million, which people had discussed, which doesn't appear to be going ahead in terms of recommendation. Skyline, is it really the right priority? Is it what we really want to spend £8 million on? If you look at other parts of the budget and where we've spent money in recent years, and I'll return to this later in terms of education, I just don't think this is the right time to be spending £8 million on this project. And I believe if we were to spend an additional unsupported borrowing of £8 million, there are better and more important priorities.
Peter?
Second.
Chair, it's sorry. Second,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry, I'll formally second it.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Look, no surprise that Rising to reject this amendment and not support it. As I said in the presentation, a few facts. First of all, the £8 million. I'll be careful in terms of how I say this because I don't want to, as Mr. Smith alluded to, introduce anything that could be on private papers. But I've got some notes that I can refer to, which I am aware are in the public domain. So, for instance, the 8.072 million is due to be repaid over a 15-year period. So, again, as Mr. Smith has said, this is not a one-way investment. It's not a grant. It is a repayable loan, a repayable investment. And we as a council do that all the time on multiple schemes. We co-invest with people. This will provide us with an income stream back, the taxpayer with an income stream back. We do it on lots and lots of different schemes, lots and lots of investments in the city. It's not something unique and new to Skyline. But in terms of Skyline itself, over 100 jobs being created as full-time jobs once it's operational. Over 300 jobs created in construction of the site. Enhancements in terms of biodiversity, ecology, all of the trails up at the hill, access to the hill. In terms of our local economy, so the benefits to our own local businesses, £84 million. So again, investing 8, which we will get back, plus an £84 million uplift in terms of our economy. Now, I know the Uplands Party prides itself on being a very local party, but I do wish they would look outside their own ward boundaries, because this is about the well-being of the city, and this is about making sure that we have something that will bring 450,000 additional tourists to Swansea to support those local businesses. And again, you know, the amendment doesn't make sense. It seems spiteful almost, which is take the money out. Councillor Rice said there's lots of other things that we could be investing in. He hasn't named them here. He hasn't suggested any of them. And there isn't a suggestion that this is somehow diverting money that we would have been doing on a different project. As Mr. Smith said, we have, again, one of the largest capital programmes in Wales. It is a very ambitious programme. And, you know, this money has been secured at a very low rate. We are co-investing with Skyline, and that money will be returned to us in due course, and then we'll have an income stream from that point onwards. So for all of those reasons, Chair, I think it's a very spiteful amendment. I think it's badly thought through, would have huge impacts for the viability of the city, and more importantly, the confidence that Swansea can do big things. Because after the planning committee approves the scheme, 2 days later, for us to come along as a council and remove the funding would be absolutely bonkers.
Before I call you in, Councillor Black, I need to refer back to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, do you have any information, please, or any technical advice?
It's relatively straightforward. The amendment as it stands takes something out, which removes technically unsupported borrowing, which is the presumption for now, because I won't reveal anything else on the yellow pages, but I stick with my advice, which reiterates what the leader has said. I do expect it to repay fully over time. So whilst there is a disconnect between the two, the amendment stands technically. It comes down to political choice for the reasons that both councillors have said. So I have nothing further to add, presiding member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Black.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, there's some facts here. First of all, I think we agree this is unsupported borrowing. Secondly, the money is in the budget, but hasn't yet been approved by a report to Cabinet. And clearly, it is dependent on the business plan delivering what it says it's going to deliver. And that, I think, is my concern about this. I mean, by all means, we can take it out now, but, you know, obviously, I think the Cabinet is going to have to discuss this money and actually test that business plan, because the leaders talked about 450,000 visitors a year. I've seen 500,000, which is most probably around about that is the business plan is dependent on. If you don't get those visitors, what happens then? That money will not be reclaimed. So we are taking a risk as a council here in terms of investing in Skyline, as the leader has outlined. It is meant to be a loan, but are we going to get the money back? Are they going to get those visitors? And I'm struggling to see where those visitors have come from. Oakwood has just closed. It's not really no longer financially viable, and we're investing now, and we're now investing in a major project on Kilvey Hill, which, as the leader says, has benefits, also has disbenefits as well. And the question has to be: is it going to deliver those 450,000 visitors each year? Because I haven't seen any evidence of that. So I would hope that if this stays in the budget, that the Cabinet is going to scrutinise very, very closely the business plan is in front of them. I know it's all going to happen in camera, but they should scrutinise very, very closely the business plans in front of them to make sure that those figures are realistic and deliverable. Because at the moment, I think a lot of people are struggling to see if that is going to be the case. And if that isn't the case, this is money which is going to go down the hill.
Can I just say, because Councillor Black has asked me a question, I think just to be clear here, this has already been through Welsh Government and through all of their processes in terms of their investment and the business case. Councillor Black seems to be saying, I haven't seen anything, therefore we shouldn't do it, and I will only do it if there's no risk. Well, I think that is a very, very bad position for anybody to take, which is, I haven't seen anything, so I'm going to say no. And even if I did want to do it, if there's any risk in it, I'm not going to do it anyway. I think that sort of determines how they operated when they were the administration. But I would also say, to align this scheme with an attraction which is old and appears to have not been managed as effectively as it possibly could have been down in West Wales, is not a comparison that's worthy of this chamber.
On a point of information, Chair, first of all, I haven't said we shouldn't do it. And secondly, all I'm saying is that we have to evaluate the risk. I'm not saying the risk is too much. I'm saying the risk needs to be evaluated. Yes, the Welsh Government has put, I think, 4 million in. But, you know, clearly there needs to be a proper evaluation of the risk. And that is what this council's duty is before we commit this money. And that's all I'm saying.
Mr. Holly.
Thank you, President Member. I've actually seen the yellow paper, so I will not go into the business plan. But what I will say is the figures, the numbers of people attending it, it works out at 1,200 people a day for that figure, which is huge amount of people. But you know, I think that the time will tell when we start really working into the business plan. And I do believe the Welsh Government investment is to do with the building of it. It's a staged payment as they go along the building of it, which is slightly different to what we're proposing. I won't go any further than that because of the fact that it is confidential.
Sorry, just to say, obviously the Skyline has its pros and cons, and we're all here to use our voice, but Councillor Rice has offered a few suggestions this evening. On a number of occasions, he's been accused of framing questions or being spiteful, when it's actually our democratic right to voice some opinions here tonight, when you yourself are trying to sell your own agenda and support the Skyline, which is fair enough, and you two are able to voice your opinion too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no more questions, it's been moved and seconded, so can I have a show of hands in support of the amendment, please? All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that amendment has fallen, so we move back to the substantive motion. Yes? So, yeah. I'm gonna. Yeah, it's been amended, but when am I going? Sorry, I need to go to the vote. Sorry.
Substantial motion as amended.
Okay. Okay. So we're voting on the substantial motive as amended by the leader. So kind of a show of hands in support of that, please.
Yeah, have we actually voted on the leader's amendment on the point of order? Because I don't recall voting on that amendment. Where's the amendment in writing? We haven't seen this amendment in writing.
We did vote, there was a vote on the amendment. The Section 151 officer said that he'd seen that in writing.
Yeah,
and
but we
was
haven't,
verified
as a
it.
council, I haven't seen that in writing. We should have these amendments distributed to us in writing before we vote on them. It shouldn't be right that we have to rely on a presentation by leader, which is hardly a impartial view anyway. We need to see the amendments in writing before we vote on them.
I think perhaps Councillor Black might have been asleep when we had this debate. We just went through this question, which is I'd had advice that it could be moved in the meeting. Mr. Smith has said it is not going to be something that will be implemented today because it'll be part of next year's budget. I was also advised that I could include it in my presentation in writing, so you had it on the screen. You had a chance to read it in both English and Welsh on the screen. It was very clear, and Mr. Smith gave you advice to say that he fully understood the implications of that, and therefore it was acceptable. So I followed the advice I've been given. I've done what was asked. You've had it in writing. You've been able to read it. If you paid attention, you'd know exactly what it was all about. Stop the theatrics and let's get to the vote.
This is not about, on a point of order, this is not about theatrics. That presentation was 2 hours ago, Chair, 2 hours ago. If we're going to have an amendment to the budget, it should be in writing before us at the time we are voting on it. And we need to have it in writing. I'm going to move that we adjourn so we can have it in writing before we vote on this, please.
Do you want it to put back up on the screen? Will that help?
It doesn't need to be moved in advance, but it would help if it can be seen. So is it possible, Leader, to put it back on the screen so we can see it? And then the actual vote has been taken on the amendment, though. Everybody's already voted on that, but if you're unclear.
My understanding was we gave permission to the leader to move the amendment. We haven't actually voted on the amendment.
No, we only voted on giving the consent to the amendment to be done. Now we're going to the vote. But
yes,
now we're going to vote on the amendment.
Pardon?
Now we're going to vote on the amendment itself.
Yes.
Well, can we have it writing in front of us
substantive
then?
motion now with the amendment included in it.
Well, can we have the amendment in writing? We've voted on giving him permission to move the amendment, but we haven't voted on the amendment itself. And I'd like to see the amendment in writing.
There will be a vote on the substantive motion as amended.
Cycle.
And we'll see if we can get the amendment on the screen for you.
Sorry, Chair.
Chair, just for simplicity, we haven't debated the substantive motion yet, so we shouldn't be moving to a vote on the substantive motion until we debated it, because there are points, obviously, either side would want to raise probably about the substantive motion.
On a point of order, Chairman. On a point of order, without wanting to agree with Councillor Black, but my colleagues will know that I'm a pedant. We've agreed that the motion can be moved. The motion has been moved. When it's been voted on and passed, then it becomes part of the substantive motion that we then vote on. We haven't done the bit of voting on the amendment. Now, what I want to make sure is that when we vote on this, what we're doing is legal, and we don't have to come back in another week or so to actually do it right. That's the process that should be happened. You rightly advised us that we needed to, the council needed to provide the leader with permission to move it. He would, and the leaders explained the reasons why. He did so. He's now moving that amendment. We now need to vote on that amendment. And if that is passed to the substantive motion, then the substantive motion is altered to include that amendment, and that's what we then vote on.
Okay, thank you.
On the further point of order, Chair, what we have up in front of us is a presentation. It's not an amendment. It doesn't say where that, doesn't specify where the money has come from in the amendment. I know the leader said it in verbally, but it should specify where the money is coming from and where it's going to in the budget. That's just how a proper amendment is worded.
Presiding member, may I come in with your permission?
Yes, yes, please, Mr. Yes, please, Mr. Smith.
I do share and understand the concerns raised in one sense, but we have had the discussion and the debate, and you have had my advice. The advice given to the leader was that he could make an alteration to the motion. It is referenced as that item for the £1 million, and I did give officer advice that it is clear to me that what the leader has asked for and was voted on already in terms of giving permission for him to alter it was that the £1 million held in contingency, capital contingency, the only capital budget I hold of £1 million in 26-27 was allocated to the item displayed on screen, i.e. changing rooms. So it is a straight swap from the £1 million in contingency in my directorate to £1 million in changing rooms under the Place Directorate. It is an extension of the invite I extended at Cabinet that there was £1 million in the base in contingency for 25-26 onwards. Cabinet made a decision to make a change for 25-26, which I reflected in the council papers. I could clearly not make any further changes until this discussion today. So I note the concerns, and it would always be my preference for things to be in writing as formal amendments, but the leader has had advice from the monitoring officer with some concerns expressed by myself because I anticipated to some extent a degree of discomfiture in terms of there being absolute clarity on what it is. But I am satisfied to answer Councillor Phillips' question that it is procedurally in order. It is quite clear what the item is. If it was anything more complicated, I would not have ruled it in order for that reason, because Councillor Phillips is right. He calls it himself a pedant. He is right to follow the rules, which is to make sure that members are absolutely clear as to what they are voting on or may be voting on, and I am quite clear what it is. I do accept Councillor Black's point that it is always preferable for it to be clearly in writing for all members to see, but I do not personally think it is a particularly complicated item. The saving grace on this one is this is an ask to change something in the future programme for 26-27. So for the avoidance of doubt, when the budget cycle comes around next year and the budget, capital budget and all the other papers are voted on for 26-27, it will include the opportunity to have appropriate scrutiny of the item. It will go through Cabinet and through to Council. If it was an item in 25-26, I would be much more concerned. But as it is a future indicative item in the capital programme, I am much less concerned. I hope that assists members, but I do understand the concerns expressed in the chamber.
Can I say, Chair, can I thank the Head of Finance for his advice, which I'm happy with. I think it's important that we do have these things in writing for members as well as officers, and I'm happy the leader has now put it up on the board so we can see exactly what we're voting on, and I think we now need to vote on that amendment, so I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just make a point that when I get advice, I expect that advice to remain consistent and not change during a meeting. And I'm really annoyed that there is a debate going on here about what should happen in a meeting. So accept Councillor Black's point. I thought this was explicitly clear in the presentation. It is now, hopefully, to Councillor Black's satisfaction. I think that the fact that we're having a debate about money that potentially is going to enable young women to take place in sport and the pedantics that are going on here, I think is deplorable. I will pick up the point about advice outside of the meeting. I have followed what I was told to do. I thought everything was in order. And again, I do not expect advice to change in a meeting. It is unacceptable for that to happen. I move the amendment as on screen, please.
Okay, and I was following procedure as I thought was correct. So, Councillor Lewis.
I second as seen on the screen.
So, have we debated the supplantive motive, or do you want to have a debate on it?
No, Chair, that I've said the point in my presentation.
What we're voting on the amendment then, right? Okay, so we're going to take a vote on the amendment. So can I have a show of hands in support of the amendment then, please? Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? Any abstentions? Sorry.
Can I just say something?
Yes. The legal, Deb wants to.
Can I just confirm? Yes, I've given clear advice to the leader today that in terms of the procedure rules, alteration to a motion, that with the consent of council, a councillor who has previously moved a motion can alter it without notice being given, i.e. can move it on the night. So yes, the leader has properly moved an alteration to the motion by producing it on the screen, and I'm happy that that has been properly moved. The point I was making is that I think for the purposes of having that formally moved, because it has to be with the consent of council, so you have to get council's consent, I take the point that actually you probably needed to see the detail, and I'm grateful for the leader to put that back on the screen. But in terms of the procedure rules, it has been properly moved today. In the way that you have, leader.
Mr. Smith.
Presiding member, I echo entirely what the monitoring officer has said. The officer advice was given by the monitor officer and myself, and I do not believe the advice has changed. The advice was given that it could be moved. It was moved, and it is a future year, so I don't believe the officer advice has changed. I regret that it has come down to a long discussion about procedurals, but I am in the same position as the monitoring officer. It has been properly moved in conjunction with the way that our constitution is written, and I do not see any change in the officer advice. The leader was given advice he could do it. He has done it. You have considered it and taken the officer advice from the two statutory officers.
Okay, are there any questions then before I go to the vote? No? Yeah, is there any questions?
My point was that I thought we were going to debate the actual capital budget rather than amendments.
Yeah. Or debate and then vote.
Yeah. So can I speak on that now? Yeah. So, okay.
Oh, I'm having information from all directions here. I'm not sure where we are now.
In my view, we've had an alteration to the motion.
We've just done that. We've just voted on the amendment.
Sorry, we haven't done that.
We have
voted on the amendment. We didn't
voted on the amendment, David. We've voted on the amendment.
Sorry, we did not do the last bit, which is vote.
In my view, we've had an alteration to an existing motion moved, and it's been council's permission has been given for that alteration to be accepted. There is a debate. There is now a debate on that substantive motion, and then is a vote on that substantive motion. So we now need a debate on the substantive motion,